happen. It never is.
Yeah, that isn't going to happen.
I'm apologizing up front. Seth, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Wally. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. Always a good day. Always a good day, especially in the springtime. I tell you what, I'm retired, and I'll stop blabbing in just a minute and let you talk. I apologize, but
blab all you want, man.
This is
your show. I'm just here to hang out.
No, you're not. You're going to answer some in-depth questions for us.
All right, I'm down for that too.
In the springtime, now that I'm retired, and I know your work situation is kind of similar, I'm downstairs and I'm working on something, and I run over to the incubator, and nothing's hatched yet. Then I'm working on something else, and then an hour later, I wonder if something's hatched now. So in the springtime and the summer, this is our time to see animals hatching out and see the little babies, and it's a fun time to be a gecko, a reptile keeper, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, for me with my fat tail collection, it's kind of all year long that I get to kind of have that dose of endorphins. It's not necessarily every day, but my season spans pretty much all year. I don't get really much of a break, which I'm happy about. It's more of a trickle, a slow trickle all year, and not just a big, tidal wave at one time of the year. Like for example, with my leopard gecko collection is a little bit more wham bam, thank you ma'am. In a couple months you got a bunch of babies all of a sudden. My fat tail, I don't know what it is about it. Well, first of all, I don't brumate my fat tails. I let them all just kind of do their thing. And I've never really had to. I've been round and round about this, like with one of my buddies that I talk to a lot. And I'm sorry, I'm Cajun. I talk with my hands a lot. You're gonna get a whole lot of this. I hate it. I'm gonna try to do this, but anyway, I've been round and round with some of my buddies, and one in particular who's very successful. And I'll give him a shout out right now, and he'll get a shout out later whenever we're looking at geckos. Nick Popo at Leco My Gecko. I don't know if you might know him, Wally. He's been in the business for a long time.
I know Nick. I know the name of the business. I've talked to Nick a couple of times, just very casually. Yep.
Nick has some amazing animals, but he and I have very opposite ways of operating. Like he swears by brumating, and I've tried it. I've tinkered with it a little bit, and the year that I tinkered with it, I had better production out of the batch of females I didn't brumate than the batch of females I did brumate. And so I've just gone with no brumation since that experiment in my collection. And he has the opposite, results. But he's down in Florida and I'm in South Texas, which is very similar climates, but not, right lined up. But anyway, I think as a result of me not brumating, I have quite a wide span of ovulation seasons in my Leco My Gecko.
Frank knows. Frank's joking.
Oh, okay.
With his comments of Eggo waffles.
I'm curious about who Frank the Tank is, because I've seen him on a lot of other podcast comments.
It's actually I think it's a corporation of 28 individuals, and they're assigned different places on the internet to be all at one time. And that's the only thing that I can figure out.
They all like waffles.
Fair enough.
I'll tell one more story, then I'll shut up. It was a year ago. It was many years ago. And through the year, I put out, hey, here's some prizes if you post comments and stuff like that. And the person that posts the most will get this. The second will get this. And at the end of the year, I named the names, and Frank was like 10 times more than anybody else. And I had a couple of people come back and say, who is this Frank? You should be careful with
bot or something.
Right. And I said, no, this is a good guy. And I seriously had people, hey, something's going on here. Not mean in a mean way, but thinking maybe it was a bot or something like that.
Right.
Maybe it's Frank's AI. That's what I'm thinking.
He just said he was a bot. Hi, Moon.
So seriously, do you know him personally or just online?
We've
I know you meet a lot of people at Tinley and whatnot.
Yeah,
we've not met
Frank. For Frank, we've not met him, but we've sent some animals and other stuff to him. Good guy.
Cool.
He's one of our moderators.
Yes.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
So we're going to talk fat tails, but
Tammy, sir.
what I would like to do, Tammy.
I can't
thank you.
see it from here.
What I'd like to do, Seth, is a couple of things. Number one, if you noticed, I didn't pronounce your last name, and that's my fear, my anxiety of pronouncing people's names incorrectly. So please pronounce your last name, and also let's talk about what got you into keeping. I'm not going to say fat tails. I'm going to say reptiles, and give me a progression of how it started all the way to all the way to now. How did you develop this interest in African fat tails? But how did it all begin, Mr. Seth
Hoffpauir.
Hoffpauir? Okay, thank you.
Just like it looks. Just it sounds just like it looks.
I made it way
joking,
more
obviously.
complicated than it had to
I'm
be.
joking, obviously. No, I used to always know when a salesman was calling the house. Hi, is Mr. Huff? Sometimes they just give up. They'd be like, "Is your dad home?"
Your dad.
Back in the day, whenever you get that, just like whenever they had landlines,
Yes.
Anyway, my reptile obsession, like most of all of our obsessions, started with dinosaurs as a toddler. I think I can remember all the way back to being as far back as my memories can go. Being obsessed with dinosaurs, and then the actual obsession of like keeping reptiles definitely started when I grew up in we moved around a lot. I was born in Louisiana, but then we moved to Texas and then Oklahoma. By the time I was in like first grade, we're in Oklahoma, and I spent a lot of time growing up in Oklahoma. And the first and still one of my loves and obsessions was box turtles. In Oklahoma, there are box turtles everywhere. Every spring, box turtles just start all over the roads. And so my mom would keep a little cardboard box in the van, and anytime she'd see them crossing the road, she would save them and bring them home. And I did a decent job for as little knowledge as I had back then, but looking back, I definitely didn't have the nutrition in check. But anyway, I would have big kiddie pools in the backyard under some shade trees, and I'd fill them about half full of dirt. I'd have a big water dish in it in the middle, and hides and everything all over. And I think one year I had like 30 something box turtles, man. We collect them all year. Wow. And then I'd let them go every fall. Like we save them from the road crossings instead of helping them across. Like I said, I didn't know anything like I know now, but and I keep them and mess with them, and then we'd let them go in the fall. We lived on 5 acres among many other 5-acre plots out in the country, and so I would just let them go in our pasture, and they would disperse and be lost, obviously, from their home, from whatever county we grabbed them from. But anyway, that was definitely my first obsession, was keeping those box turtles every spring and summer. And I'd be out there every day messing with them. That was my everything. And I even remember one year we had a couple that we hadn't released yet, or we had just grabbed off the road, and they were in a box, they were in a box, and we were about to release them, but then it was a hard freeze that came that we didn't expect. And I was so upset. I was distraught, and we had them. My mom brought them inside, and she was all upset too. And then, a few hours later, after we had just had this whole meltdown, we hear scratching in the box. And sure enough, nothing was wrong with those turtles. They were all fine. Those box turtles can handle some serious extreme temps. Obviously, they weren't optimal in their burrows like they should have been. But anyway, I learned a lot keeping those guys, and we actually hatched a few. We had kind of a staging area at my buddy's house. He had a sandbox, and so sometimes we would keep them there for a few days or a week or so before they made it to my house out in the country, because he lived kind of in the neighborhood. And then one year we were out there playing army, kind of digging in the sand, and we had a clutch of eggs that some turtles had laid inside his sandbox. And I accidentally broke one of the eggs, but they were near ready to hatch, and we ended up being able to save it. And we had a whole clutch of eggs, and we each kept one, and we let all the other ones go out, like I said, in my pasture where we would. I promise you that area of Oklahoma has a very nice population of box turtles at this point.
Cool. How cool is that? Especially to hatch one out, group out and see the little babies. Is that what did it for you? Was that like the turning point to hatch babies?
No, I don't think so, because I was still really young when that happened. I mean, I was probably second or third grade when that happened, maybe.
Oh my.
It was very, very young, early in my, reptile keeping career. It was I knew nothing, and but anyway, that was my first love, and I still have box turtles. I have a pair in my backyard of adults and I have a clutch that I found in their enclosure 2 years ago that are inside in a little, in a decent, little bioactive enclosure. So anyway, I love box turtles. That's my first and always love. I'll always have box turtles. And from there it progressed into, I think my first like indoor reptile was a iguana, a 4-foot iguana.
Oh my gosh.
Female that my parents bought me that had been kept in a 55-gallon aquarium, and she was so mad. She was evil. And they then bought me a props to my parents for like really hooking me up here, because they bought me I don't know how much it cost them, but they got a big snake enclosure that somebody had that was a 6 foot tall, 8 foot long, 4 feet deep room. And we lived in Colorado where there's big basements. And so we were able to set this thing up in the basement. And this was this room that Iggy had, my iguana. And Wally, once we put her in there, she was a whole different animal. That iguana was so sweet after she was in that enclosure with all the room. But she only liked me. She was kind of freaked out by everybody else and would tail whip everybody else. But I could go in there and she would literally like climb off of her log down onto the floor and climb up onto my shoulder. She was a sweetheart. So I had her for years. And then I got a couple of ball pythons when I was like 14. And they are actually, well, I got one when I was 14 and one when I was 16. And they're right back there behind me in their enclosure. They are 26 and 24 years old. So that's my kind of progression of keeping as far as like indoor animals. And then I had leopard geckos when I was in high school, and I produced my first leopard gecko when I was like 19, right after I graduated high school, and it was a het albino because the male was albino. I worked at a pet store, and so I got them all from there. And this was back in 2002-ish, 2003-ish. And then when I got in the oil field a few years later, I got rid of everything. I got everything but the snakes. The snakes I kept because they were low maintenance, and I was able to, just take care of them when I was on my days off. So I didn't get back into geckos until about 2013. In 2013, I bought a trio of geckos from Petco, and for a project for my boys, for me and my boys. They were 8 at the time, I think. No, they're probably younger than that. No, they're 5.
Okay.
6. They're 5 or 6 at the time. And we bought a trio of leopard geckos from Petco, and I bred those. And in 2014, November of 2014, I think, we produced our first gecko, and it was a blizzard. And so we were so excited. And of course, you know how somebody that doesn't know anything thinks when they hatch something like that looks way different than their parents. They're like, oh my God, I've got something here. I'm going to be rich. This is everything. Like, this is something new, like different. And so I thought I was onto something, right? I had this like crazy looking gecko, and come to find out I didn't have anything at all. Obviously, the first expo I went to, I met the first mentor that I had was Sean Gray. You might even know him. He's been around for a while. Night Glow Reptiles.
Oh yeah.
And he I brought that Blizzard with me and, asked him like, man, check this out. What would you pair this to? And I told him the whole lineage behind her and everything. And he looked at me and he was like, I'm gonna be honest with you, man, nothing. He's like, that's a pet.
Did he kind of give you that look like, how do I break this to this
Yeah,
person?
dude, it was the first heartbreak I had in this, in this hobby. As far as like thinking I knew what I was looking at and doing and realizing that I had not a clue. And so that was kind of the beginning of me breeding leopard geckos, was meeting him and getting actual genetic, lineage geckos. And that was in 2015. So that's kind of where I call my start. Even though I produced geckos, I produced a gecko way back in, I mean, see, most people would say they have a 20-year or 20+ year career. A lot of people would kind of elaborate that and be like, oh, I've been doing this for 20 something years. No, I started this in 2013 with nothing, with Petco geckos. And then I started investing in breeder quality geckos in 2015. So at this point, I've been doing it about 8 years, officially.
I tell you what, Seth, that's a very, very, for as much knowledge as you have, and the I'm going to say industry, as much knowledge as you share with the industry, that is a very, very, very short period of time. It really is. So hats off.
Thank you. So that's basically my background and start of everything. And then not long after I started getting into leopard geckos, I discovered fat tails. And that was a simple chance of one of my twin boys, his favorite color is blue. And we were at like the second or third expo we had ever been to. And we walked by a table and we saw these geckos that had blue tails. And he was like, Daddy, I want these. And I was like, no, that's fat tails, buddy. We don't really know anything about those. We don't work with those. And the breeder was getting out. And he was like, look, man, I don't really, they're very, he told me they were exactly the same as Leos to breed. And so I was like, all right, cool, let's do it. And so I ended up I bought that female that day, I think. And then I went back and bought a male and the clutch mate to go with them the next day.
Wow.
And so that was the start of our fat tail keeping, and that was in 2015. That was our first trio.
When you started into fat tails, and I know the answer to this, but I want everybody to understand this. When you started into fat tails, did you drop everything else and go, okay, I'm 100% dedicated to African fat tails?
No, not at first. They definitely sparked a main interest in me, but I was still very much and am still very much interested in my leopard gecko collection and those projects.
And you still are.
Yeah, I'll be honest. These days, like the last year or two, I've been really dedicated to my fat tail room, and the leopard geckos are getting great care. But as far as like project wise, like my mind's not as much like I have to really force myself to go in there and be like, all right, these projects are ready. And I actually took a kind of a little bit of a reset this year because I had a bit of an overstock from last year.
Yep.
And so I held off on my pairings until about a month. About a month ago. I started pairing. So I'm about 2 months behind on production right now, which is what I wanted. And it's nice because I'm looking in my Leo room right now and we got like 50 empty gecko, hatchling tubs, and I'm like totally ready for babies to start hatching, which is what I wanted. That was the goal. I don't wholesale, Wally. I don't know if you know that about me. I don't wholesale at all. With the very small exception of like I have a buddy that owns a pet store that I know is very ethical in keeping, and I'll sell him a few animals at a time at wholesale pricing, just so that he can make a profit on them. And I know they're going to a good pet store that educates well, right? But other than that, like I don't mess with the vultures that come around at the expos and stuff. That they most of them even know not to come to my table because I won't give them the time of day.
Yeah, I can do the same thing. I can count on one hand the times that I've had excess, and probably a couple of times was leopard geckos, where I've gone to a store or gone somewhere else and wholesale animals. And I don't think that people that don't do, it's fine if that's
Not
one
to
of
look
your
down on it.
outlooks.
Not to look
Yeah.
down on it. Yeah.
No, not at all.
Each their
But-
own, but
but-
it's just not for me.
Yeah,
No.
and I don't think that that's shared enough in the hobby. You know, I don't go around saying, "Oh, we don't wholesale," or we don't bring in. You know, we do a lot of rare animals, and I don't put rare animals. We don't put wild caught on our table, and I don't know if that's good or bad that I don't advertise or publish that enough. And if you're not wholesaling, I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing that you don't emphasize that.
My thing is, as soon as I wholesale an animal, I lose that connection to the customer.
Wow.
And
Well
as soon as I
said.
lose that connection to the customer, I don't have any ability to, like, every gecko I sell, I have this line that I tell people. I'm like, look, I stand behind my animals 100%, but I can't fix a problem I don't know about. So here is all my info, my cell phone number and everything. I have a sticker that I put on top of the cup as I hand the gecko out. And that, is a statement that I make with every sale that I make to make sure that they understand that, like, you have my attention. If you need me, I'm here. You're not just buying my animal, you're buying my support for the life of that animal. And I stand behind that.
Yes.
And so anytime you wholesale something, you don't have that opportunity. You don't have that connection. It's gone. And so that's my thing with the wholesale thing. And it's just a preference. But the only way to do that is to be responsible and kind of pull back the reins sometimes. And even now that I'm making Leo pairings, I'm pairing a fraction of what I could. I was talking to my helper the other day, and I was like, we could be producing a lot of Leos right now, but I don't want to. I have a lot of different projects that are pretty stacked up with, plenty of animals, but that's not what I want to do this year. If we grow into that in the next couple of years and there's a need for that, then I have the animals to do it. But right now, with the help I have and the amount of expos I'm doing and the amount of online that I'm doing, I've kind of figured out the amount that I want to work with.
I tell you what, folks, too, I'm going to throw in a comment to that. As far as you grow in the community and as you produce, this is the most important part here: quality animals and quality customer service. Seth, you become less dependent on wholesaling, and you become less dependent sometimes on reptile shows. You develop a following that people come looking for you, and I'm sure you'll throw some animals on Morph Market and they're gone. So that's another good testimony to what you're doing with your animals. So keep it up. We're kind of the same thing with leopard geckos. I haven't even paired off. That's this weekend's project. I have to pair off my leopard gecko. Everything else is paired off except the leopard geckos, and it's not out of lack of passion. It's just like you're saying. I'm kind of
no. You timed it. You're working. You're timing it properly and being responsible with your schedule. That's props to you.
Exactly.
Not enough people are doing that. Many people are like just trying to produce everything they can out of every animal they own, and it's again, not hating on that. It's just not for me.
What was the turning point for you with African fat tails? What said to you, this is pretty cool stuff? I think I'm going to build my African fat tail collection. I think I'm going to go this route with my African fat tail collection.
So it wasn't an overnight thing, honestly. It was just kind of grew. Their personality intrigued me, and I really liked how calm they were and how some people say that this isn't the case with theirs, and there are some outliers to any animal, but for me, in my collection, 90% of my animals are super chill, dude. Like they'll just curl up in your hand and literally go to sleep. Like they are not looking to just scurry away all the time. And that's what I really liked about them. And with my boys at the age they were, once we were producing both leopard geckos and fat, because we produced leopard geckos for probably a year or two before we produced our first fat tail. And so once I started producing fat tails, the difference for the boys, they preferred them because they were at this point 8, 9 whenever we started producing fat tails. And so, and I don't know if you know this about our collection, Wally, but my boys have always been very involved in the care of our babies. And still to this day, like that's their That's how they earn their weekly allowance. Is they take care of each boy has 2 hatchling racks, so they're each responsible for 36 geckos. And I rotate that to where, the youngest gecko is at the top left, the very beginning rack, and the oldest gecko is at the bottom. And then I bring them in batches to the shop as they're about 2 months old or so. I bring them in batches to the shop, and then they start on my hatchling rack at the shop, and then they're in my care. And then that's the age that they're about ready to go on the table, right?
Wow.
About 15 grams typically is what I like to, start everything at.
Wow.
So that's how
That's
we've
cool.
always done things. And so they preferred the fat tails. And so that kind of was just a natural progression as it being a family operation of, that's what we kind of lean towards. And we'll always have leopard geckos, and I'll always love leopard geckos, but the fat tails have definitely, and then as I became more of a, into the breeder side of things, I realized that it was a more niche market and not as saturated as the leopard geckos.
Yes.
And so I realized that was probably a little bit better direction to go if I wanted to kind of not stand out, but like just have something a little bit, be able to do something a little bit different,
Yep. We can go through, the hobby, and we can say, name off, if you've been in the reptile gecko hobby for any period of time, I could ask you, name off how many crested gecko breeders, and then you go through a list of 20 to 30 or 40 or 100. Okay, great. Name off the leopard gecko breeders. We could probably still go through a list of tens, dozens. Name off a list of the African fat-tailed breeders, and I'll challenge anybody to come up with a list more than 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Yeah,
because it is a very niche kind of situation.
Especially if you're just talking about it in the States.
Yes, exactly. We're going to talk more about the market and the business kind of things. What I really want to find out, and again, if folks in the chat, if you have an African fat tail, if you've ever had an African fat tail, make a comment. Tell me that you've had one. But for those,
by the way,
go ahead.
Everybody, I have bad ADD, and so I've got the comments completely off because I want to focus on the conversation. So the only comments I'm seeing are the ones you bring up to the screen, Wally. I just wanted to let everybody know that, like, if they're commenting, asking me something, and I'm ignoring it, it's not out of disrespect or anything. It's just because I don't want to take away from the conversation.
That's all on me, and it's my fault, folks, for not sharing your comments. Like I said before, if you have a question, put capital letters question, and then we're going to star them. We're going to bring them back up, unless I see one that's very relevant for this time. Thanks for everybody's patience with that and good comments. So I forgot my question now.
I'm sorry.
No, not your fault. That's me being old and squirrel. So, we're going to talk about the business side of things. I know where I'm going to
where you're going.
We were going to talk about their general care. I was asking everybody, if you have fat tails, put a comment in the comments in the chat. But more importantly, I'm going to see a lot of no, I've never kept African fat tails. Tell us, Seth, number one, why should we keep African fat tails? And you kind of touched on it a little bit there with how cute they are. Number two, tell us how to care for an African fat tail. We're going to get into some very specific points that are kind of, I don't want to say controversial, but I don't want to say myths either, but the way a lot of people keep them is maybe not the best way. There are some very different ways that I've heard you talk about, and we're going to get into that, but give us a general, why should people keep them, and how do we keep African fat tails, especially if somebody's kept a leopard gecko? How different is that?
So I don't want to, the reason that I like to keep them is because of their personality. Their personality is very calm. They're the calmest gecko that I know of. They're the calmest gecko species I know of. And the most like uninterested in biting you, like, they just, they'll just hang out, like if you're really like, they don't like to be constricted, which most geckos don't, because they're all prey items, right? And what I always tell kids is just be a tree. Don't like wrap around the gecko. Just be branches for it to hold on to, and that helps a lot. But other than that, like they'll just kind of curl up in your hand and go to sleep, like I said earlier. And that's what I really loved about them from the get-go, and what has always drawn me to them. So their personality, their ease of care, as a pet, they're pretty much almost as easy as a leopard gecko, as long as you're attentive to your animals. Like what I tell people, and it's the sad truth of the matter, a leopard gecko can tolerate neglect pretty well compared to an African fat-tailed gecko.
Agreed.
So like people can keep and even breed leopard geckos with horrible husbandry, and you won't be able to tell it at the expo on the table.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I know exactly.
Especially if they're selling, especially when they're selling the tiny babies that just hatched, you know,
Yep.
or 10, 10 grams or so. You can't tell what kind of husbandry they have when they're selling that age of gecko. Because some of them aren't even eaten yet, or if they are eaten, it's just had a couple meals. You can't tell the fat composition or whatever.
Yep.
And there's no telling what those parents look like, or if they even made it through the season. Whereas a fat tail gecko, they will really show your lack of husbandry skills if you're not on top of things. They will show neglect very quickly. They'll dehydrate a lot quicker.
Yeah.
The babies, the hatchlings are more fragile. The embryos are more fragile. You got to be more on point with your vitamins. You got to be more on point with your humidity and incubation. You got to be more on point with your temperature fluctuations. It's just, you've got to be more dialed in. It's just that simple. And so if you're a lazy, not lazy, but if you're a keeper that's very busy and your collection is just kind of afterthought,
yes,
maybe fat tails aren't for you, or maybe they're for you as a pet, but definitely not for breeding. Because what I always tell people is, as keeping them, they're not much different than leopard geckos, but to breed, they're much different. So if you're going to get into breeding, you really got to dedicate yourself to learning about them. And that's why I've been trying to put more content out on YouTube. And I'm going to try to get regular with that, because there's not much out there, and there needs to be, because they're really cool geckos. And so
yes.
I feel like they should they're underrated and underappreciated, in my opinion.
1,000%.
And then what was the second part of the question, Wally? How do you care for them?
Yeah. How do you care for them? Give us a general.
First of all, you follow my YouTube channel.
There you go.
And you check that out. There's only like 5 videos on it. I'll be honest, I've been lazy on it. It's been several years that I've had it, and I've only got like 5 videos up at this point, just in the last couple months. But I'm going to continue putting content on there, just fat tail related. It's all unedited. Just me sitting just like this, talking to the camera with my crappy phone, iPhone, just trying to get information across. I'm not worried about fancy intros. I could care less about the following or the whole YouTube fame nonsense, or even selling more geckos. All I want to do is have a resource to send my customers to be able to educate them in a very thorough manner. When I'm at an expo and they ask a question, I can be like, all right, here's the short answer, but go check this video out, and even already one of those videos is a 2-hour-long conversation that I had with another breeder that was all on how she keeps bioactive, because she keeps all her adults on bioactive, because that's not something I practice regularly. And so I couldn't really educate that in depth to my customers without, just saying things that I've read. I wanted to have a resource that was somebody actually doing it. And she hasn't been doing it forever, but she's been doing it for like 4 years, which is not a whole lot less time than I've been doing it. And so it's credible to me. You know what I mean? And she's doing it successfully. So.
And I'll repeat myself, but there's a lot of information out there. Find a couple, 3 good experts. And YouTube is the I think one of the most important ways to find that information. If you don't feel comfortable going to a breeder, look for a YouTube, video that they do and follow that.
But you got to be careful who you're looking at too, though, Wally, because it's so easy to make a YouTube channel. And I tell people all the time, you've got so many people out there that have a YouTube channel that may only have 2 animals that they've had for 2 months and they are experts all of a sudden, or even if they do have a large collection, they could still be putting out a lot of bad information and just doing things unethically. So you got to really look deep into who you're following and who you're taking advice from and how ethical they are and how, how much they're actually doing things properly,
Yeah.
and how much experience and reputation they have too,
So you've put out about 5 or 6 videos. I'm going to stop yelling at you in your comments to do more videos because I know that it's coming. But everybody else, go to his YouTube channel. Frank, I don't know if you can find his YouTube channel and post the link for us. That would be greatly appreciated. But everybody in the chat, go to his YouTube channel, subscribe right now. When hopefully Frank or J-Bug can find that link, and then go to the very first video and in the comments yell at him and say, "Produce more doggone video." Darn it all!
I'm gonna work on it, guys. I'm gonna work on it.
Don't leave the live to do that.
But don't do it now. Don't do it now.
They're very cool geckos. They're very easy to take care of. I say they're very easy to take care of. We actually had a big conversation last weekend, me and a good friend of mine at Expo, about like what that means, easy to take care of. That's a different perspective for everybody. You know what I mean? Like something that's easy for me is not necessarily easy for you. That's not necessarily easy for somebody else.
Yes.
It all depends on our lifestyle and our situation and our everything. So, but they're a good starter pet, in my opinion, for several reasons. Those reasons are they don't get very big, so they don't require a huge cage. 20-gallon is kind of optimal. You can definitely go bigger, 29 or a 40. They'll use the space, but they don't, they don't absolutely have to have like a big 4x4 or a 6-foot cage or anything like a beardy might or some larger lizards, especially an iguana or something like that. So they're definitely fit in that starter category as far as cage size. They don't require special lighting as long as you supplement properly. 20 long or a 20 tall. So check it out, Jay. One thing I do is I make these starter kits, and they're 20 talls on their side with an acrylic front. And a 20 tall on its side is the same exact square inches of floor space as the 20 long is, whether the 20 long is on its side or upright. So that's a quick fact there. You can definitely use a 20 tall on its side and have the same real estate as a 20 long. Or 20 tall on its side have the same real estate as a 20 long. If your situation, everybody has a different spot that they're trying to put something in. And so I offer those starter kits in several different sizes. We do a 10, a 20 tall, and a 20 long. And I tell everybody, if you have the budget and space, go one of the 20 gallons, right out the gate, and you're better off. If either one of those are an issue, that's why we have the 10-gallon option, And actually a 10-gallon on its side actually offers a little bit extra floor space as well. You end up with like 2 inches extra as opposed to it upright.
Tell us about tank decoration. It kind of leaves substrate as the last piece of this, but tell us what, kind of hides and decorations, plants. What am I going to put in my?
Lots of clutter. Lots of clutter. Fake plants, cork bark, driftwood. Clutter it up. They're very reclusive. They don't like to be out on display, out in the open. They're gonna make their rounds in the evenings, but they're gonna hide all day. They're not one of those geckos that's gonna necessarily beg to come out. And that's what I tell people, like as compared to leopard geckos, because we have both on our table all the time, and people are a lot of times trying to figure out which one they want between the two. And what I tell people is they're kind of like cats and dogs, or introverts and extroverts. I heard somebody else say the other day. Whereas like the leopard geckos will be begging to come out and more kind of like a dog, like let's go do something once you get them out. And the fat tails are more reclusive and kind of want to do their own thing. But then once you get them out, they're happy to just kind of curl up and hang out with you.
Thanks, Abby. We'll cover that in just a minute. Good question. Sorry, go ahead, Seth.
Yeah. So lots of hides, hot and cool. They definitely, in my opinion, everybody needs a humid hide, which is just a small Tupperware container with a hole cut in the top, about half full of substrate. And I keep that substrate good and wet, not like soupy and dripping, but I wanted 100% humidity in there 24/7, 7 days a week. Okay. because what we're trying to mimic is in the wild, they live in burrows and termite mounds. And so that's where they spend the majority of their time. They definitely come out and do a lot of roaming and hunting and all that. But the most of their time, and they're sleeping, and especially when they're in shed, is inside a termite mound. So I'm trying to replicate that with those humid hides and have a good sauna type situation. And I keep it on the warm side of the cage. I do like an oblong or oval shaped humid hide, and I do the hole on one end of the lid.
Yep.
And then I'd put that hole off of the heat and the rest of the humid hide on the heat. That way it improves and increases condensation, but reduces evaporation.
I'm going to make you go back just real quick so we can emphasize this point so much. So one of the very first mistakes that I ever made was trying to keep them like leopard geckos. And then I improved my care. And again, this is 15 years ago or more. Improved my care, and I kept them in a sweater box, a 27 quart. And it was substrate. And I tried to moisten, a log, a cork bark, and I'll moisten under that. But I had a humid hide as well. Are you saying the whole substrate should be damp? We're not talking wet. We're not talking soaking, sopping wet. But should it be damp?
In the whole cage?
Yeah.
I don't keep it that way.
Okay.
I keep my cages dry and just provide a really humid hide.
Okay. Okay. Cool.
Because that's a lot easier to keep clean. I keep more of like a laboratory style setup because I have so many. That's why I did that episode with that other breeder that keeps bioactive, because I wanted to have a resource for people that keep bioactive on some scale. And so she keeps them. Well, actually, it's not even fully bioactive because she doesn't have bugs and everything. She just cleans up after them. But it's more of a naturalistic style setup with substrate and, heat lamps and UV lamps and all that. So, the quick answer to that is I keep my cage dry with a good wet humid hide. But if you're going to keep the naturalistic style setup with substrate, you will need, I would recommend misting it daily, at least lightly, because you don't want it all dusty. They're not a desert species. They live in coastal Western Africa like I said, inside termite mounds. And if you want to learn about fat tails and where they come from, research ball pythons, because they live in the same damn termite mounds as ball pythons. And there's plenty of info about their natural habitat, right? Because that's a huge monetarily important species. So
I'm going to throw it out there too. I'm sorry, because I've heard you say it before, and I don't want to lose this point because I'll forget it in 2 seconds. You mentioned a lot about Dave Kaufman's video, and I think that he says in there quite often, or shows, more importantly, shows the situations that you're exactly talking about.
Yep, absolutely. And he's not my only resource, but that was definitely a good video that is out there. That's another good resource that's out there. Humid hide is a must in my opinion, whether you keep a naturalistic, bioactive, simple Simon, laboratory style, I don't care. Humid hide. I introduced a humid hide once my babies are about a month old. They get a humid hide, and it's a really shallow, easy to get into humid hide with paper towel substrate, and that's how I. And I've kind of seen this over the years of keeping and breeding them. My geckos really learn how to use their humid hide when they're very young, as opposed to I've gotten geckos from people that don't use humid hides and just mist every day. And those are the geckos that I usually have trouble with on shedding because they don't use their humid hide like they should, because they don't learn how to use it when they're young.
Good point.
That's just my personal experience with it. Call me crazy or not. So humid hide for me is a big plus, or a big must. And then their temps are really important. Leopard geckos have a very wide range that they can thrive in, from like literally below 80 degrees all the way to over 100 degrees for their hotspot, and they're going to make it work.
Yep.
That goes back into them being able to thrive. They come from a more harsh environment. And I do a lot of leopard gecko comparison because leopard geckos, there's a lot of info out there for them. And so if I just kind of do the contrast and contradictions from keeping those, it kind of clicks with a lot of people, I find.
It's a good reference. Yep.
Yeah. So the fat tails come from still a very harsh environment, but not as drastic of temperature swings and not as drastic of not as low of humidity. So that's basically the fat tails have a smaller temperature window. Instead of 80 to 100, we're talking 90 to 95 for your hot spot.
For your hot
And
spot.
that's not the if you're going to do a naturalistic setup with a basking lamp, that 90 to 95 is not at the top of a branch right below the heat lamp. Okay. That's not where the fat tail is going to go, especially not, he's not going to get out during the day and go there when he needs that heat. That 90 to 95 is inside of the hot hide where we're trying to replicate that termite mound. Dave Kaufman on that video took temps of a termite mound. During the day. It was like 94 degrees. And at night, I think he didn't. Did he take the temps at night? I don't remember, Wally.
I forgot.
I think he did, and I think it was still in. I think he was still in the 90s. And then he did ground temp at night. Like that's definitely a good resource. But bottom line is that area, that region, rarely sees super cool temperature swings. They do a couple times a year. And another really important thing to keep in mind is if you're like these days, you can just look on Weather Channel and see, okay, what is it like in this region of Africa, this time of year. And even if you see lows at a certain time of year, you got to keep in mind that's not all night. That's at the very dawn. It's coldest at dawn, right?
Yep.
Right when the sun comes up. So it's a very slow, gradual drop from that 99-degree high they had at sunset to even if they have a wide temperature swing down to that 70 or 80 mark that they have at sunrise. That's something really important to keep in mind if you're looking at that.
Another really good point, because if you are cooling at night, if you have your, let's say, heat tape on your rack and it's set up to go off at night, and then it comes on in the morning when your lights go on, it's like, okay, it's on, and 10 seconds later you have your 90-95.
Yep. Yeah, and vice versa.
Yeah.
If you've got a heat source that completely cuts off and you're in a 70-degree room, that cage is going from 90 or 95 degrees where it's supposed to be to literally, even if you have a bunch of stack of, lots of bricks and cement and temperature absorbing material, even still, that's not the same as the ground out in the plains of Africa. That's not the same heat retention. And so in a matter of hours, you're going from 90, 95 to 70. And that's a 20 to 25 degree temperature swing. And that's the biggest problem I see, Wally, online of people that are having trouble with their geckos that they got from elsewhere, or even some of most of my customers are pretty dialed in because of the way that I communicate. But some of the people just don't quite get it all clicked in. And that's the biggest problem I have is they're too big of a temperature swap. Temperature swing.
Yep.
Too cold at night, or even not warm enough at day, or too warm. They'll heat stress easy. So if you're not regulating a heat source and you got them in a 10-gallon and they're overheating all day, and then it's cutting off at night and they're too cool at night, that gecko is not going to eat. It's going to be stressed out. It's too hot at day and too cool at night, and nothing's clicking for it. So,
you talked about, we're going to get to Angie's question because it's so relevant to what we're talking about right now, but I'll strongly suggest, Seth, and you can do your YouTube however you want, but oh my gosh, would that be a great video? Not just the care of African fat tails, but let's talk about heat, and then covering just the aspects of where your heat is and how you adjust, up and down, and just kind of talking about, in nature, how you've tried to replicate as much as possible what's happening in nature, and what if you're incorrect, if you're too far one way or the other, or it's just too cold, what happens to that gecko? What could you potentially be doing to that gecko, right?
Yeah. So for the humid hide, my humid hides actually don't stay at 90 to 95. I know I mentioned I was trying to replicate the inside of that termite mound with the humid hide.
Yeah.
But that's more on the humidity aspect. I don't want to overheat them and I don't want to heat stress them. So I'm shooting for a dry, hot hide target temp of about 92 degrees. That ends up being about 80 to 85 degrees all the time in their humid hide, which is on the hot side of the enclosure. So that's kind of the answer there. Is the humid hide? My humid hides stay about 80 to maybe 90 degrees, but probably more like 85. And then my hot spot is in the 90 to 95 range.
Perfect. Perfect.
And for my babies, I keep them a little bit warmer.
Yep.
I keep my babies at about 94 to 96 degrees even, especially the ones that are getting sprayed down every day before they get their humid hide, because anytime you add that hydration, even though a more humid enclosure feels warmer to the touch, hydration cools things off every time you spray that water in there. And so if you're hydrating every day on a little tub that's just barely 90 degrees, even when it's dry, then it's going to take a long time for it to get back up to that 90 degrees. And those babies might not start as well. So that's a really important factor for people that start breeding and have hatchlings, is keeping those babies a little bit tweaked higher to that 95, 96 degree mark. That way, when you spray off, it's recovering more quickly.
We're going to talk
and they've
about.
Still got the cool side of the tub too that they can always hang out in.
Yes, we're going to talk about. Gecko Garage was asking about morphs. We're going to talk about that later, and that's going to be very, very, very important. But folks, just tuning in tonight, this subject that Seth just talked about with temperature. If you keep African fat tails, go back to this video and watch that. I know I will be. I think that's maybe one of the biggest problems that people have with African fat tails, is maybe their hides are too cool and they're not giving that exposure like they really should.
Definitely.
Great point. How do you provide heat? Are you, and it varies, I'm not saying that listen to what Seth is doing because that's how you want to set up. I'm saying there's a lot of different ways, but how do you provide heat?
I use heat tape and ambient temperature. So I have my thermostat in my facility set at about 75, which in turn keeps my ambient temp in my fat tail room at about 80, which the door stays open. That's the room right behind me. The door stays open all the time, but just with all the heat tape going in there, and I have the vent closed in there, that keeps it right at 80 degrees in there. And then I have an air purifier right in there circulating the air.
Yep.
And then my hot spots, like I said, about 90, 95 degrees. But it's all heat tape on thermostats, on quality thermostats. Don't skimp on your thermostats, guys. That's the most important aspect of any reptile setup, whether it be a naturalistic setup, a rack, an incubator. Your thermostats are critical. Don't skimp on them. Just spend the money and just bite the bullet. Trust me.
Good call. Very good call.
And the two top brands like really stand behind their products too. So just
and they've been around forever.
Yep.
They're proven. Let's talk about some of the issues that you could have with African fat tails. I know shedding is one, and we kind of touched on that. So
yeah, shedding.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry. Shedding definitely is a common issue that people see, and usually they're just keeping them too dry, or not cold, not warm enough. Both. Or a really common problem that I see is even if they're keeping the cage warm enough, they've got the humid hide all the way on the cool side of the cage, and it's a really big enclosure, and so that's room temp, and so that gecko is not opting to go in that humid enclosure that it needs because it's too cool, because it's got a full belly, and so it happens to be shedding while it's got a full belly, and it's not going to go use that humid hide, or even if it doesn't have a full belly, it doesn't want to go spend enough time in there to absorb the moisture it needs. So that's a really important point. And that's tricky because once you put the humid hide on the warm side, then you're going to get more evaporation. So you have to stay on top of it more. So that's why I just tell people saturate the hell out of that humid hide for the fat tails. Just not soupy and dripping, but damn near. Like what I do is I use clear humid hides, and the dirt kind of changes colors as it dries out, right? So for my Leos, I just kind of hydrate to where the top quarter inch or half inch even is dark, and for my fat tails I saturate it all the way to the bottom, but again, not like soupy in there.
You say this, Seth, and I'm like, oh, that's a great idea, and then I realize my banded geckos are set up exactly the same way.
You do the same thing,
and literally I look at the hide. Oh, there's enough moisture in there. Why don't I do the same thing that I'm doing with my bandits with my other geckos? Because my other geckos are different hides. So I don't know, but that's a great suggestion.
No, I like being able to see the color change on that dirt because it depends on the species, which I don't keep. I only keep 2 in high numbers, but depending on the species, you need a different hydration in that humid hide. Anyway, that's my thing with shedding. Another thing that I see with some females, and that's keeping a lot. I'll see it, and it's really just with a couple of females that they get it consistently. They'll get some little buildup in their scent gland area. So the females will have bulges right at the base of the tail where a male's hymen penis would be. And so in those bulges is scent glands for the females. And most of them don't ever have any issues with it. Like 98% of my females, I would say, or 99% of my females don't ever have any issues with it. But there's a select few that will get a buildup there and it'll cause, inflammation. And the first one I noticed, or the first several I noticed, we had to do surgically because I didn't notice it quick enough and it was too big to expel manually. And so we had to, I have a close relationship with my reptile vet and we work a lot together. And so the first couple we had to do surgically, and now I know how to notice it early enough and expel it or express it when it's still small enough to do so. And there's actually one of my videos on YouTube is specifically about that. So I'm not sure what causes it. He's not sure what causes it. It just looks like built up, like just tissue or it's just like a hard piece of like pussy material, really. Like it's not like hard as a rock, but it's not soft either. You know what I mean? So who knows?
I've had it one time, and when I did see it on one of my females, the neck shed and it was gone. And luckily, but I know sometimes that can stick and
I think that's what it is there's like a pocket right there that normally sheds and expels itself with every shed, but some girls just aren't operating properly there, and it's just not no, we didn't talk about morph yet, Nikki.
Not yet, and we're leading up to that in just a minute, but I really wanted to focus because again, there's one of the I don't know, I don't want to say stigmas. One of the concerns about moving forward from leopard geckos or crested geckos to a more advanced species like African fattails is some of the myths that are sitting out there with how to care for them and how to make sure that they're shedding correctly and everything like that. So Seth, some of this information is just golden information. I'm trying to make sure that we're covering all of the care before we get into breeding.
Yeah, as far as we want to talk about care obviously before we start breeding stuff. I think that's the main things that I focus on people. Well, nutrition. Let's go to that real quick, Raleigh.
Yeah, yes.
Nutrition. I educate about. Anybody that's seen me at expos can attest to this. I am the nutrition education guy at the expo. Everybody that walks across my table, I have a line that I ask them. I say, hey, how you going? You have any geckos at home? And if they say yeah, I ask if it's leopard gecko, what kind of geckos. And if it's anything that eats insects, I ask them what they feed, what they feed their gecko. And then I don't really care what that answer is. I just want to lead up to the next question, which is what do you feed your crickets, or what do you feed your worms, or what do you feed your roaches? And 9 times out of 10, with the exception of Denver, Colorado, I'm proud of Denver. They were like 60-40. 9 times out of 10, they look at me with a blank stare and have no idea what I'm talking about.
Oh, no.
And then I lead that into, let me introduce you to some information because you can never have too much knowledge. And it's all about how you present the information, Wally. You know this after doing expos for so long.
Yep.
If you present it in the wrong way and talk down to people or are condescending to people, they're not going to receive it at all. They're going to turn off instantly. They're going to turn up. A wall's going to come up and they're done talking to you. So
Thank you very much. And I'm walking away. Yep.
You have to make sure you present it in a really inviting manner of like, can I educate you? Because that's a condescending thing to say. I've done that before and people have been like, huh? Later. I literally use the words, can I present you with some information? Because you can never have too much knowledge. And when you say something like that, they're like, yeah, I mean, you can't argue with that statement, right?
No.
And so then I hand them my care sheet and I point out the section that's about gut loading, which is the first section of my care sheet. because that's how important I think it is. And gut loading, like I tell everybody, is just the process of feeding nutritious ingredients to your bugs before you feed your bugs to your geckos. While we're on that, Wally, I know you do isopod chow. Do you make a gut load?
I do.
You do? Do you
I don't
mind
want
if I
this
shout out my gut load that I'm
please
in
do.
love with right now?
So I was going to say I don't want this to be an ad for me, but I absolutely
No.
want this to be an ad for you.
So I just found one that's called Feeder Fuel that some chameleon breeders that I'm local to and been the same expos to make, and it is amazing, Wally. It is just awesome gut load. So I use that for my pre-feed gut load, not my maintenance stuff. I have a cheaper stuff that I use for my maintenance on my bugs.
Say it one more time.
Feeder Fuel, and they are Reddy's Rainforest is how you can find them.
Cool.
Ready.
Cool.
They're probably in the chat, I think. She said she was going to make it. Amanda Reddy. They're awesome people. Have beautiful animals, captive breed, all their stuff. Their setups at the expos are awesome. But anyway, that's my shout out to them. Check out their Feeder Fuel. It's really good. I knew you did the isopod chow, but you have a gut load that you sell as well.
We do. Gosh, I don't want to get into.
Is it just a formula that you've had for?
I tell you what I suggest to people is try
them all and mix
different options.
Variety.
Yeah.
Variety. Just like having different bugs.
Sense to you, yeah.
Yep. Just like having different bugs in your repertoire, it's good to have different gut loads to rotate in and out because they all have different ingredients and you want to cover all the different metabolic needs. So definitely use variety. So nutrition is a big thing, as you can see, that I love teaching about. And then supplementation.
Can I ask you something? You made a comment though,
yes,
there that I want you to emphasize. You said that you use the feeder food to gut load, but not in the maintenance. So can you explain that to our viewers?
The feeder fuel is pretty pricey. Most of your gut loads are going to be pretty pricey because it's people that are, customizing these ingredients and really, personally grinding these ingredients and mixing them. So it's pretty pricey. So I use that just to gut load. But then like my maintenance is a much cheaper chow that I get from a dubia breeder that's still not, it's not chicken scratch. It's not 50 cents a pound chicken scratch from the feed store, but it's not the really high end stuff that you can get on the gut load end. So I have two different chows that I use, one for maintenance and one for like 24 hours prior to feeding. And that's for all my bugs. Same thing with my mealworms. I make my own mealworm chow. That's kind of my maintenance bedding. And then I throw them on the feeder fuel right before I feed them and let them chow down on that. And I'm really happy with that chow. And then fresh veggies, lots of fresh veggies, dark leafy greens, carrots, and spaghetti squash has the highest calcium content. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think spaghetti squash has the highest calcium content of any veggie out there. So I'm a big proponent of spaghetti squash.
I thought it was kale, but if you came to me and said, "No, look, Wally, it's right here," I'd go, "Yeah." Kale's another big one, but I want to ask you,
dark leafy greens, that kale, collard greens, turnip greens, mustard greens, bok choy. I use all of that stuff for sure.
Why is it important to gut load? You've made this comment 2 or 3 times that you have this maintenance.
Need,
but why should I gut load?
Well, because a bug is not so. I know you know this, Wally. Good question. So if you're feeding rodents or something like that, they have muscle and bone and all this matter that is just it is what it is, right? It doesn't matter so much what it's in its gut. Its gut is a very small fraction of the mass. A bug, the gut is the majority of the bug. And so bugs literally are what they eat. And so you want to make sure that bug is really loaded with nutrition before you pass it on to your animal. And if you're not doing that, you're really going to have to feed twice as many bugs to be able to reach the same nutritional content, and you're still not going to cover everything. So no matter if you're dusting everything with calcium and multivitamin, if you're not gut loading, you're not covering everything.
It's not
tips and tricks to get fat tails to eat mealworms. I do have a trick for that. I'm sorry, what'd you say, Wally?
No. It's not just for the feeders. It's not to have a healthy feeder, which is important.
No, it's to pass along to your reptile.
Right to your animals.
Yep, exactly. That nutrition. Look at your feeder as a vessel. a vessel to inject that nutrient into your animal. That's how I look at it. And so I just try, like, for example, I would rather not feed a day that my geckos are hungry, make them go a little bit extra hungry one more day. If I've got to gut load those bugs that I just got from whatever source for a day, rather than feed them those empty bugs as soon as I get them. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I'd rather feed them 24 hours
1,000%.
later. I'd rather feed them those fully loaded bugs and then be a little hungrier than they were before, than feed them some empty bugs, whenever they're begging for food. Does that make sense? I'm going to
steal a little bit of this thunder and say one of my biggest pet peeves in feeding animals is to see somebody's video, see some pictures, and it's one leopard gecko, and they have a mealworm cup, and that mealworm cup is heaped full of mealworms, and I know they're going through once a week or once every 2 weeks and just dumping.
Yep.
It's just, I see a picture like that, and I just think, what a flippin' waste.
And if they're even gut loading before they dump them. And here's the other thing, Wally, about that nutrition aspect. I've heard a lot of people tell me how many mealworms they feed, and it blows my mind with how much mealworms they go through and how many geckos they have. My leopard gecko collection is the primary consumption of my mealworms, and I've got maybe, 100 animals in there, 150 animals in there, and I go through, and then also we feed the fat tail babies mealworms. Okay, so I've probably got 200 animals feeding on mealworms. I go through about 12 to 15,000 a month. That's not many.
Mm-hmm. That makes
That's not a huge amount.
Yeah,
right?
That sounds.
I've talked to people that have similar amount of animals and go through like 50,000 a month.
Yeah.
They're just like blowing through them.
Yep.
And I think they're just very wasteful. And I'm not like refeeding, and I'm not like saving and refeeding or anything like that. I'm very conscious about gut loading, first of all. And once you do that, you don't have to feed as many worms per gecko. Like, it's just, or crickets per gecko, or roaches per gecko, or whatever it is. They're loaded with that nutrient. Anyway, that's my rant on gut loading. And then supplementation.
2 hours on gut loading. We could talk.
Yeah,
2
right.
Hours on
Oh, we could. We absolutely could. And then supplementation, calcium with D3 and multivitamin.
Is there
multivitamin is a big thing with fat tails, more so than leopard geckos for comparison. I feel like it's a big factor on like underbites and stuff like that. As far as like hatching babies, starting to get into the breeding aspect, but even keeping, they need a little bit more multivitamins. So what I recommend my pet owners that buy geckos from me is calcium every single bug and multivitamin every other bug in addition to the calcium. And that's, you're not going to overdose them on anything. Anything they don't use is going to pass through their system. But less is more with that said. You're not trying to like waste all that stuff because it's expensive, supplements. So
can I ask you, and again, this is a question that if you're thinking about getting into some serious animals like this, you should ask more than one person. But I'm going to ask you, Seth, because I don't have two other people to ask. What brands do you use for your vitamins, and what brands do you use for your calcium?
I use the same brand that I've used since I was 14 years old. Reptile brand, calcium with D3. Excuse me. I had my blinds all pulled up so the window light could come in, and it just fell. I need to turn my lights on too because the sun went down, so it's getting dark in here. But I didn't want it glaring. Anyway, Repcal calcium with D3 and Repcal Herptivite. That's what I've used since the very beginning of keeping reptiles, and I'm not, if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of thing. I have added some vitamin A plus into my multivitamin in very monitored, well mixed, small amounts, because that is something that you can overdose with, is that vitamin A.
Yes.
So what I do is like a 1-to-10 ratio vitamin A plus to multivitamin. No, hang on. Yeah, a 1-to-10 ratio vitamin A plus to multivitamin, and then I mix that multivitamin that has that vitamin A plus already in it. I mix that a 1-to-10 ratio in my calcium. And so everything that gets the calcium has a little bit of multivitamin in it and a trace element of that vitamin A, but I mean, just trace element. And then, so my babies just get the calcium mixture with that little bit of multivitamin in it. They don't get any of the multivitamin. And then my adults get the multivitamin in addition to the calcium.
Okay. Perfect. And folks, remember that your vitamins have a shelf life, so be careful with that as well.
Yes. Keep them as cool as you can and as airtight as you can. Definitely don't keep your whole storage in your reptile room at 89 degrees. It does degrade, and it degrades with UV too, so keep it dark.
Let's cover this question, then I'm going to go back to the live chat. I've missed probably a question or two, but is there any tips on or tricks on how to get fat tails to eat mealworms?
You got to teach them how to eat out of a bowl first, because if a fat tail has ate crickets all its life, then it only knows how to hunt crickets. It doesn't know what a food bowl is. Most of my fat tails, or all of my fat tails, know what a food bowl is because the way that we start them. But the way to get a fat tail, if you can get it to eat mealworms, first of all, your temp's got to be on point, because a mealworm is a little harder to digest than a cricket. So if a fat tail is just barely at temp, it might be extra picky about its feeder sources, because some feeders are easier to digest than others. But if its temps are on point, it'll be more apt to feeding different eating different foods. So, but even with that, you have to teach them how to eat out of a food bowl. And the way that I've done that in the past is I've taken crickets and delegged them. So if you pinch a cricket right above its knee, like right on the thigh, if you pinch it, the leg just pops off. It doesn't pull the guts out or anything. It just releases it. And so if you remove the hopper legs and put it in a food dish, then it can't escape. And so a gecko that's on crickets is going to go to that food dish to find those crickets, because it's familiar with the smell of that cricket. And so that's going to teach them how to eat out of the food dish. And then you can incorporate a dubia or two with 4 or 5 crickets the next feeding after they get used to the food bowl, and or worms. And then once they figure that out, then usually they're more willing to eat other things out of the bowl. So that's my recommendation there. But still, some fat tails won't eat mealworms at all. Even mine that I offer from babies, I've got probably 30% that'll never touch a worm. However, some fat tails that won't eat mealworms will mow down on a super worm. Explain that. Obviously, they're different species, but they apparently have a much different smell, because I'll introduce a superworm to a fat tail that hates mealworms and he'll chow it down. So there's that too.
I have a lot of people asking me about Nephurus or Underwoodosaurus mealy, and how do I get them to eat anything other than crickets? And what I say is put them all in one dish.
Right.
And if you put crickets in a dish and if you coat them with a supplement, they'll spin and spin and spin. And they'll sometimes get out, but don't put 100 in there. Put 3 or 4, and they'll spin and spin in that dish and not really want to get out. And then throw in, some mealworms in there too.
Yep.
And all of my mealy eat mealworms, because I think they just associate the dish with food and whatever's in that dish. So
kind of like you.
Yep.
Kind of like me. Yeah. Anything in a dish, I'm crazy. So cool.
But yeah, so yeah, that's pretty much it on the care. Supplementation, nutrition, and then the temps and humidity. That with any reptile, temps and humidity are your most important thing anyway. You want to replicate that natural environment as far as temps and humidity go as much as possible. Whether you're doing a simplistic laboratory style setup or a naturalistic style setup, those temps and humidity are still the most important factors.
Yes. We've got a ton of questions, but let's cover breeding. Lights. Did we talk about lights?
UVB is always beneficial to any reptile. It can be beneficial. Nocturnal reptiles typically don't need it. Fat tails fall in that category. If you supplement them properly, they can do without it. A lot of people swear by it. A lot of people swear without it. I've not used it for years and not had any issues. Calcium with D3 is the key factor to that. You have to have that D3 component.
Right.
So that's my recommendation there, is if you're not going to use UVB, and even if you do use UVB, I still recommend D3 with fat tails, because they're very reclusive and cryptic animals, And even if they cryptically bask, it might not be enough absorption, and D3 is not going to hurt them, but it will definitely help them if they're not getting enough UVB. So that's my recommendation on lighting. Just ambient lighting is plenty. You can use a heat lamp if you want for their heat source, but make sure that you have a supplemental heat source for at night, because as we discussed earlier, room temps are not okay for these guys. In the wild, they rarely see below 80 degrees or mid 70s at the most at night. And that's right at sunrise. So you don't want a quick drop, and you don't want too much of a drop.
I'll throw this in real quick with the UV lighting. I've changed my process years ago to not offer UV lighting for 12 hours a day like I do my normal lights. I'll turn them on. When everything goes on, I'll turn on my UV lighting and for about an hour or so. And then they go off for an hour. They go on for an hour, they go off, then they go back on about an hour before all the lights go off again. And it's just a way to save on the bulbs a little bit. But really, a lot of animals don't utilize UVB, for 12 hours a day. Just a little thing there.
And there's also dimming features you can get on thermostats and stuff these days, to where you can have it really naturalistic, to where it's like gradually increasing the intensity as you go, and then gradually decreasing. So that's cool.
Yes.
I'm actually about to start a project of doing like naturalistic setups for some of my male fat tails. So that's going to be a cool project to kind of document.
Nice. Sounds like a good YouTube video.
Yeah, I'm getting there. I'm working on it. I'm working on it, Wally.
Seriously. I'm going to push him doing YouTube videos more and more.
Right.
Let's talk about breeding. And we're going to get to some pictures in just a second, folks. So bear with us. Thank you for your patience. But let's talk about breeding.
So breeding, they are a little more tricky than leopard geckos, definitely. They require, the females require more attention, period. You have to stay on top of their nutrition. You have to be feeding the hell out of them. They will go down hard. Usually the worst time I see them is usually right around third clutch. For some reason, that third clutch usually just takes it out of them. And if you're not on top of them, they will go downhill, and sometimes you can't pull them back. So you definitely got to be on your game with your females, pre-season and during season and post-season. Like they're very kind of needy in that aspect. Which again is what I like about them. It makes them a little challenging. It makes it to where you have to actually care about what you're doing, and you're not going to get as many, backyard breeders that are doing it just to do it. People actually have to be passionate about these guys to work with them. So that's one of the things that I think kind of makes them unique. And like I mentioned earlier, the babies are a little more delicate. The embryos are a little more delicate. I've found a lot more tail truncations with too much humidity fluctuations. So I've increased my humidity content at the get-go to where I don't have to add hydration at all throughout the incubation process. And that has reduced my tail truncations significantly. So that's a big tip there.
I'm going to talk about incubating the eggs in just a second, Seth, but what I'd like to talk about is tell us about your introduction process. Are you doing it like the leopard geckos, a couple of days in, a couple of days out, a couple of days in, a couple of days out?
Yeah, pretty much. Okay. I might leave them a little bit longer because the males aren't quite as aggressive, most of them. With the exception of a few, and I usually retire. Those usually end up getting fired pretty quick and find a pet home because I'm not going to tolerate, unnecessarily tearing up a female.
Yep.
Especially if it's not a critical, project or something. I might do some supervised pairings if it's a little bit aggressive male and a not as willing female, but typically these guys you can just kind of put the female in and leave them for a week or so, and they coexist pretty well. I don't keep them together long term at all, so that's kind of my thing there. A lot of guys will keep groups. I don't. I just keep everybody individually. I don't think it's worth the risk, in my opinion. And if I'm keeping a group of females, I can't monitor the girls as well and don't know exactly who laid what when. And so it's just easier for my system to keep everybody individually. So I introduce the female into the male's tub once she's ovulating. I mentioned earlier, I think that was already in the live, right? About my season, how it kind of has three kind of waves. Yes. The main fat tail season is in the fall. So right around October is when most of my girls ovulate. And so from October, November, December is like kind of the biggest wave of my season as far as laying, ovulating and pairing and laying. So then January, February into March is kind of my biggest lay season on the fat tails. And so then, but then there's a whole nother wave of girls that starts like in March. That's a little bit smaller wave that ovulate from March into like now. And then I'll have another wave of girls starting in July, August that'll kind of go into the fall. So it ends up being like 3 kind of waves that go into my seasons where it's constantly a little trickle, with the most of it being winter into the spring.
And you're not talking about, I want to make this very clear for everybody listening, you're not talking about your females ovulate 3 times a year. You have
no.
Some that
Correct.
go late in the fall or in the fall, some that go, so 3 different groups.
Absolutely.
So you do that
each
yourself?
Female, no, that's just how they
are.
Yep. And it's not even necessarily genetic groups that ovulate differently. It's more just kind of depends on when the female when the female hatched originally. Because typically most of them I find at about 6 to 9 months, they have their first ovulation.
Okay.
And this is a really important point I want to put in here, Wally.
Yeah.
Because there's some misinformation about this. I personally will not even look at a female until she's 18 months old to breed. Because at that 6 to 9 month old ovulation mark, with a very rare exception, and even those I still won't breed because in my experience, it's still just too young. That 6 to 9 month, even a year mark that they ovulate, that first ovulation, their body mass is not to its full capability. And if you just pass that one up, just don't be greedy, be patient, look at the long game, look at the female's health as being priority, and wait until her second year of ovulation, which is usually around 18 months to 2 years old. That's my rule. I don't even look for ovulations with the intention of pairing. Now, if a 8 month old or a 6 month old isn't eating, I'll look at her and see, oh, you're ovulating. Okay, that's why you're not eating. Okay, we're okay. But as far as like looking for ovulations, I'm not even looking at it until I get to that, 16 to 18 month mark. And that's a hard rule for me.
No, it's a good rule. When I started Leopard Gecko breeding myself years ago, there wasn't much information on it, and I bred it. You go through it one time where you lose a female that means a lot to you, and that changes your perception so much.
Well, even my Leos, I won't breed below a year. Even my brand new Leos that just hatched last year, I'm pairing some of my older ones that are like early season girls that are about a year old now. But all that later stuff, even if they're ovulating right now, they're gonna wait till next year. It's just not worth it for me.
Are you looking at age, or are you looking at weight as well?
Both.
Cool.
If I have some outliers, especially with the Leos, if I have a 9 or 10 month old Leo that's just a really, really big female that's grown really quickly, but with that said, I don't really like power feed my geckos, so I don't have that very often. You know what I mean? Like some guys will make sure that their 6 to 9 month old Leos are 50 grams and ready to roll. I don't feed that way. So my animals aren't usually at that stage, at that age, or at that weight, at that age, if that makes sense.
I'm just the opposite. I just piled the mealworms into a mealworm cup and just left
them and just never gut load them, right?
Yeah, exactly. And never gut load. We're going to talk about incubation medium that you use, but I wanted to catch a couple of questions real quick here. We covered this, Cassandra. Is there an egg laying season for?
Yeah, we covered that.
Talked about that, but give me a second here. We talked about supplements, but there was
if you're gonna brumate, if you're gonna try to find the season and you're gonna brumate, I would recommend starting your brumation like in September-ish and coming out of them. They only need like 6 weeks of actual like off heat. So coming out of that like mid-October, you know what I mean? Starting at the beginning of September, coming out mid-October, and making your pairings in November. is what if you're gonna like try to really replicate that cool season or whatever, because that's when, and that's just based off of when the majority of my collection is popping.
I incubate. I brumate some of my animals for 3 months, but that's more for me to give me a break. It's just too much.
Yep.
We have Abby asking, I've been told that the first year breeding African fat tails, especially the first year for a female, is pretty rough and fertile eggs, blah, blah. Has that been your experience?
The infertile eggs dying and all that, that's a lot of, first of all, for the females, it's pretty rough, period. No matter if they're first season, second season, third season, you got to be on top of them, like we mentioned earlier. The eggs, we'll get into that right now.
Yeah, please.
The thing with fat tails, they're not as consistent. So I'll have, 2 or 3 females that I grow up from a project, and 1 or 2 of them will lay good for me, and the other one will just always lay duds and never be much of a good breeder, or might only lay 1 egg per clutch, and half of those aren't any good. Their egg fertility and overall production rate isn't near what, in comparison again to the leopard geckos. So you don't have as much of a fertility rate on that aspect. I think that goes into maybe the males being a little lazier and not having as much, emphasis on breeding. Because I've had some males that take several years to come around. Just can't get with it. Or maybe they'll breed one girl the first year, and then the second year they'll breed 2 girls, but the other ones they're not interested in. And then the next year they might breed 3. And it's like, come on, dude, get with the program. Whereas I've had some other fat tail males that at 5 months old are rocking and rolling.
Yeah.
And making a pairing or 2. I'm not putting those to many girls, but I've had several seasons that I've had a young boy that I'm like, let me check. And sure enough, he's after it. And I've checked with my vet and, talked to other people. And as far as all the research I've done, as long as a male is big enough, there can't be any harm done to breeding them young like that, as long as they are, big enough to protect themselves against the female, and it's not a big oversized female that they're going up against. And as long as they're actually interested in it, then you can't really do any harm there, with the exception of sometimes, and even with, especially with fat tails, how they can be kind of finicky. Sometimes you get a male that once they have that experience, then that's all they want to think about.
Yes.
And so they'll kind of go on hunger strikes because that's all they're thinking about. And so on an adult male, that's okay. They can lose a little bit of weight, but on a 4 or 5 month old baby that's growing, you don't ever want to have a hunger strike when he's still in his growth phase. So that's the only precaution I throw out there, is like, I only do that with really good eaters, and I'll do it like, I'll pair him to 1 female, and then, that's it. And then he's eating. And it's just certain projects that I've had that I'm kind of like, I really need this to go, and I just give it a shot. And if he's interested and the female's fully receptive, then it's worked out for me a couple times. So that's just to say, like, they have a wide range of age that they can be interested in getting it done.
I feel that this show is packed with information, but there's been a couple of points, and that was just one right there that I struggle mightily with the Facebook groups, as far as your male has to be this big before you can introduce it. A male flipping knows that it's a male, but with the caveat that as long as it's eating healthy, as long as it can hold its own against the females, watch the heck out of that male. But
you don't want to put a little baby male to a female that's 3 times the size of him, and especially if she's not receptive. You got to know your animals. And some females are just they need a more dominant male to come in there and say, no, this is, it's time to get this done. Whereas some females are just like begging, I have some fat tail females that will literally go and like bite at the male. They'll nibble at the male. Like, come on. Just begging for it. Yeah.
Let's go, big boy.
So it's funny how they're just totally different. So you got to know your animals and make sure that you're making responsible decisions there. How can you tell when they're ovulating? Just like leopard geckos, it's a little bit harder to see because they're not as opaque, or they're more opaque of a belly as the leopard geckos. They're not as transparent. So Google leopard gecko ovulation. It's 2 little oval shape. The way I describe it, you'll agree with this, Wally. You remember the magic 8-balls?
Yeah.
You remember how whenever you would do the magic 8-ball, that little triangle would float to the surface? Think about when you roll a leopard gecko and you kind of move her body around and get that follicle to move to the surface. Isn't that similar to that magic 8-ball?
There you go. Yeah, perfect. Perfect.
So what you're looking for is those two oval shaped pink follicles that you'll see. One of them is usually, let's see, when I'm turning them over, yeah, right and left, but one of them is usually further towards the head than the other. They're usually not like symmetrical in lineup.
And unfortunately, it's something that if you don't know, you don't know what to look for. But once you know, it's like, okay, I know. But good point, though. Watch some videos. There's pictures all over the place. It's not easy the first time you do it, but, practice makes perfect.
And honestly, some of my fat tail females, I can't even see the ovulation on a lot of times. I just know because they'll have a hunger strike. And as soon as I see them refusing food, I'm like, all right, let's go. And so that's kind of a good indicator there, because they're more of an appetite suppressed animal whenever they come into ovulation. So that's definitely a good indicator. If you see a good eating female that always eats good, all of a sudden refuse a meal, then that's a really good indicator that she might be ovulating, especially if she's around that 18-month mark and it's time anyway.
Interesting.
But yeah, some of them have a really opaque belly that you can't see through very well.
Let's talk about eggs. So, oh my gosh, my female just laid eggs. Wally, what should I do? How do you handle incubating eggs?
I use a little bit different method than a lot of people. I like the Pangea Hatchum, the clay substrate.
Yep.
I've used that forever. It's just what I started with. And my main reason for liking it is because just like the dirt in the humid hides, it changes colors whenever the hydration level changes. And so I can visually see if it's starting to dry out a little bit. And so that's kind of been the reason I've stuck with it. The only drawback, or the main drawback I've seen of it, is it can stick to the geckos a lot whenever they first hatch and they're still wet. And so that can be a problem if they ingest it. I've seen Leos ingest it and pass it with no issue, but I've always wondered about, some of the few failures that I've had over the years, if maybe they had ingested some and it was an issue. The precaution I take for that is I make some little egg trays that sit in the cups that I use. And I do single egg system cups. I use the little 5.5 ounce cups, and I make my own little egg trays out of some yarn, like it's called plastic canvas or yarn doilies. It's like you used to, I cut those down to fit in the cups I use, and then I cut a little cradle out in the center so the egg sits perfect. I've got hundreds of those that I've made over the years, and I just wash and reuse them. And so that I use as an effort to keep that baby a little more separated from those rocks, both for the incubation process. So if it's overhydrated, it's okay because the egg is suspended in air. It's not actually touching the rocks, because I kind of create a crater down below that cradle area. So the egg is just kind of situated in the air in 100% humidity environment at the right temperature, which we'll go into that real quick. Fat tails, just like the adults, have a smaller temperature range. Also, the egg incubation has a smaller range. So, for example, Leos can go 80 degrees for females, 85 for mix, and 90 degrees for males. Pretty straightforward, right?
Yep.
If you go 80 degrees for female fat tails, they're going to incubate almost full term, and you're going to lose 90% of them at hatch, or almost at hatch. You got to be at I've found about 83 degree to be that thriving mark.
Really?
So I actually incubate my females. My Temp-Sex female incubators at 84 degrees. That way I have a little 1 degree buffer there. And now that makes it tricky if you're doing Leos and fat tails, because 84 degrees for Leos, you're going to get some males. But what I do now, like this season, I'm not incubating any Leo males. I'm putting all my Leos in that 84 degree box, and I'm going to get what I get. If I get some males, hopefully it's on what I needed. Certain projects that I need males, I'll put at 88 degrees with the fat tail males. And that's the other thing. The males, if you go up to 90 degrees like you can with Leos, you'll start getting females again. So I've found 87 to 88 degrees to be the better mark for Temp-Sex males on fat tails. So 84 degrees for females and 87, 88 for males. So a much smaller window.
So I will share 2 points real quick here, because this is your show, not mine. But as far as the hatch material, we've been using it for a long, long time too, and I 100%, believe in it. I'll throw a little plug. We sell it as Supreme Hatch material on our website, but great product because you can tell when it's moist and when it's dry.
Yeah.
As far as other materials, I found with crested geckos, using Paralite, I hated with the patch because I would see it in dead crested gecko babies' mouths.
Right.
So that was, first couple of times it was like, what the heck's going? Third time it's like done.
Yeah.
So I get away from that. I got away from that way years ago. My second real quick point is temperature. So we were probably, when we were doing fat tails, we were probably incubating at 80 to 82 degrees and losing a lot of them. So that's probably why.
Yep. I'm telling you, my first couple seasons, because the people I talked to originally told me, yeah, you incubate them just like Leos. And I don't know what they were incubating the Leos at, but everything I read online was Leos, temp sex female, 80, maybe 82, and temp sex male, 89, 90. So that's what I was doing. And I was getting a big failure rate on my females, and I was getting a horrible ratio on my temp sex males. I was getting like 80% females on my temps. I was getting a better hatch rate because they were at the viable temps, but I was getting a horrible ratio of what I wanted as far as those temp sex males. I was getting like 70, 80% females in my temp sex male box. And so once I tweaked those numbers a little bit, I've had a way better hatch rate in my temp sex females, and I've had a way better success rate in my temp sex males as far as getting males.
Wow, that's scary how bad. Again, I probably quit 5 years of doing African fat tails, probably 4 or 5 years before you started. So all that information was out there, and I just didn't know any better, and I don't want to change this. Maybe, I don't know. That's so hard.
There's just not that many people working with it, and there's even fewer people putting info out there. It's almost like they're like gatekeeping the species and trying to keep the success of it to themselves in some cases, because I know there's some people out there that have known this information for a long time and just haven't been forthcoming with it, in my opinion. So
we don't gatekeep here at all. So thank you for sharing that. That's, again, another golden moment. What about the ideal temperature for an adult male and a female?
About
a male.
That's kind of funny because so my adult males, like adult 2-year-old males, can range from 35 grams all the way to 100 grams. Legit, like that big of a variety. Majority of them are in the 60 to 70 gram range, but that's the swing of it. I've had some little bitty males that just never get very big, and I've got some huge males that are just Goliath. So that's the gist there. Females, I like to see about 45 grams. The 35 gram girls, I'm not a fan of. I usually just, if I can't get a female to get over 40 grams by the time she's 18 months old, or especially 2 years old, I'll usually just pass her on as a pet only, and move on to a different female. Just because in my experience, I've found that, and some people say otherwise, but I've found that those smaller females just have a little bit more trouble kind of keeping up. So I'd rather see those 45 to 50 gram females in my breeding program.
Perfect. We've talked a little bit about baby care. I don't know if we need to focus on anything else right now. I'm trying to get to morphs because I know a lot of people have been here for a long time, and I appreciate you guys staying with us and being patient while I interrupt Seth with my stories here. But I really want to talk about morphs now. Let's show some pictures. The moment I've all been waiting for. And I'm going to fly through, Seth, some of these pictures. You are going to help me out by telling us what the morph is, other than if you want to, rather than doing this, if you want to talk like from beginning, low end, normal.
No, this is good. Let's go through the pictures real quick, and then I've got the list of genetics written down, and I've got examples of all those we can kind of quickly look at. I'll turn the lights on in here so we have better lighting. I was trying.
I tell you what, folks, these are some amazing animals. So what is this one right here?
This is it's just a whiteout is genetically all it is, but it's from my mango project, which is a line-bred line of or selectively bred line of whiteouts that I've been working with for pretty much all of the time I've been working with fat tails.
Nanette just asked, when are we going to show the fat tails? Because this isn't a fat tail.
Wow.
So yeah, that's a mango project whiteout is what that is. That's a 2nd gen, I think, and I've got some 3rd gen stuff that's or 3rd or 4th gen that I've got to show y'all tonight. Actually, you'll probably get to one of those here in a minute.
Okay.
The thumbnail was actually a 3rd or 4th gen. That's the same project, mango project whiteout, same genetic whiteout.
Is that
so?
White?
The thing about the whiteout is it's got the widest variety of visual expression of any genetic in any reptile I've ever seen, Wally. They've some of them barely look different than a normal, and some of them look like this craziness. It's really, really intense. So that's my favorite. That's one of my favorite parts about the gene is that it's so much variety.
I've probably not gotten into fat tails in the last 5 or 10 years because I'm working with Periodora picta, and that's my pet project. And I've always said the variety is every single animal looks different. But as we're going to see with these pictures, just amazing, just amazing.
Same thing, mango project whiteout. That's 4th gen as well. That last one and this one are from this season. Those are both holdbacks from this season, and those are 4th gen animals from that project. So they are. And with that project, I've had a lot of genetic diversity from the beginning. And so when I say 4th gen, that's not 4th genetic of inbreeding. That's 4th genetic or 4th generation of selectively breeding. Actually, her parents are completely unrelated. So that's like, it's just a project that I've kind of, it's my passion project, basically.
Oops. I think I doubled up on that one.
These look like leopards.
There we go.
So that's a tangerine whiteout patternless from a pretty premier project that I'm working on. She is het amelanistic and possibly het ghost. So the amel ghost combo is one of the few combos that doesn't really exist yet. They have a few of them in Asia. I haven't seen any adults developed yet to see what they're going to look like as adults, but my vision is a neon purple and orange gecko in an amel ghost, because a ghost has a very purple coloration, like a true actual color banding. No, well, this is a patternless, so we lose the banding there. But like whenever we get to the ghost, whenever I show you a ghost, you'll see the ghost has an actual true lavender or purple banding that is just unreal. It's unreal, man. And so I think that an amel ghost combo, because an amel has a lot of bright orange background, so I think an amel ghost combo is going to have a purple banding with an amel with a orange background. So this girl here could produce some, like, at least nation's first animals for me next or this fall.
How exciting is that?
She's got some cool genetics stacked in there.
I've seen a picture or two of the animals coming from overseas, and what I've seen is just the pure white.
Yes, that one's really cool. I'm not even sure exactly that guy. He doesn't post like descriptions of everything that he posts, so it's kind of hard to see exactly what genetics he's expressing there. But yeah, there's some definite cool combos still up, and that's one of my other favorite things about the species is there's still a lot to learn and a lot to be done. You know, it's just so much still on the table.
Completely agree.
That's a second picture of that holdback female that you showed earlier. That's my favorite from this year from the Mango Project.
Beautiful animal.
And my main goal with that project is the orange blushing and the bluing in the tail, and just a high contrast.
I'm at the end of my file, so I'm going to work backwards here real quick. Sorry about this, folks. Okay.
That's okay.
So that is my black velvet project. That is a random animal that hatched. Did I send you another one with two of them, Wally?
You did. Let me get over there.
That's a better picture of it.
Bear with me, folks. I think that was it, right?
No, keep going.
No, I think that's all that I have.
Okay, that's okay. So that's the same gecko though. That black one is the same gecko I had in my hand. She's just a little younger here. So she hatched out of my Oreo patty project that I was actually working towards size on. See her brother there to the left, the Oreo boy. He's a really big male that that I hatched, but the parents of that pairing are both larger animals that I was searching towards a bigger fat tail, and this color variation popped out. So she's just an Oreo patternless combo, but the Oreo patternless combos usually look very similar to his lighter coloration that you see there, like more of a silvery color, and they don't keep that dark coloration like she is. So the fact that she's staying so dark and her sister's staying really dark too, I'm hoping that I can really dial that in and try to replicate that on a consistent basis. But that's one project that I am not very genetically diverse in, so I'm having to already bring some new animals in to try to keep that base there. I'm not seeing any issues or anything, but I just want to make sure that I'm staying on the forefront of that as far as keeping it fresh.
I can relate this to, I hate to say it again, but I can relate this to Periodora picta, where people will say, well, what's the I'll produce something and I'll show pictures. I'll go, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And people go, well, what is it exactly? What morph or what trait? And I'll go, they haven't proven it out. It's so new.
It's just something. It's just something that popped up. That's how this is. This morph combo, she's just an Oreo patternless. At the base of it, she's just an Oreo patternless combo, just a double recessive. Yes, but the fact that she's staying so dark is very unique. So I'm hoping that there's something in there that I can pull out of there. So we're gonna be searching on that project for a bit. I've got a lot of stuff cooking and some stuff on the grow out rack already this year from that project. So fingers crossed.
Right. I've got a really silly question here.
There are no stupid questions except the ones not asked.
All right. When I'm looking at this picture and I know nothing about the animals, how do I know that they're fat tails when I know that leopards are orange?
Just said
I know Seth said it. So no, help me out here. How
honestly,
do I know the difference?
There's not a whole lot of big differences. They have a little bit bulgier eyes. They have a little bit shorter snout. They have a little bit shorter limbs. Their tails don't look a whole lot different, honestly. A healthy leopard gecko and a healthy fat tail gecko, a not overweight fat tail gecko, is going to look about the same as a not overweight leopard gecko.
Okay.
They have a very similar tail structure. The fat tail name is kind of a misnomer or a misleading name because I think it relates more to the regrown tails that are very bulbous, which a lot of your wild caught fat tails are going to have a regrown tail, whether it be the importation process or what. So I think that adds a lot to that there. But visually, you just kind of have to eventually know what you're looking at. It's okay. If you put two of them right next to each other, the leopard geckos have a little bit lankier build to them. That's the best way to explain it.
Okay. All right. That helps.
And for my purpose, once again, let's go from top to right to left with this picture. The top.
So yeah, the top one is just a patternless, but she's Soot's sister. So that the dark one is Soot. So the top one, her name is Ember, and she's just a patternless, but she's from that Black Velvet project. The bottom left that's Thor. He is an Oreo from that same pairing, but he's not the super dark look. And then the right one is an Oreo patternless. That's Soot. So you got a patternless, an Oreo, and an Oreo patternless. And those are all keepers. Those are all still here. I've kept everything from that project so far. I'm going to be hoarding that for a few years until I get it dialed in.
Is there a definition of, obviously patternless is patternless. Is there a definition of Oreo? Could I say?
It's an axanthic.
Okay. Perfect.
It's a simple recessive axanthic. It removes all the blues and greens and red. Well, it removes all the reds and greens from the color spectrum, basically.
Perfect.
And leaves you with grayscale. That's Mango Project stuff. That girl on the right, I think I ended up going ahead and rehoming her because she ended up not being very much of a big grower. She wasn't big enough. She was one of those that just stayed in the 30, 32 gram range. And even though as beautiful as she is right there, I just didn't want to push it with her. The one on the left is breeding this year. I don't have any fertile eggs from her yet, but hopefully, fingers crossed, I'll have something from her soon.
So are those stripes then purple or?
So that's just whiteouts. They're just genetically whiteouts, but they're from the Mango Project, so they have a lot of high orange blushing and a lot of bluing in the tail.
Okay.
Wow.
I thought African fat tails were dark.
That is Skittles. She was my best production ever of the Mango Project. I actually lost her last season though.
Oh,
Aw.
I'm sorry.
Yep, she was in her second season of breeding, and it is one of those, like I said, these guys can really go down hard sometimes, and if you don't catch them in time, they will fail. So she's no longer a part of our collection, but she will always live in our hearts for sure.
Absolutely.
Beautiful.
Okay, here we go.
That's an AML. That is one from Nick Popo at Lecco My Gecko. Most of everything else you showed so far, I produced. This guy here, I've not produced. I got him from Nick on a trade, and he's the nicest AML I've ever seen. He's just intense orange, and his white is true white. I mean, he's just the epitome of that morph for sure.
Did you get this one as an adult?
No, I got him as a youngster. He's still a sub-adult right now.
Okay. And the thing about males is that they have most of, well, I guess maybe with all of them, is that they have most of their color when they're young, and some of them gradually lose a little bit.
Yeah,
of the
they'll
color,
fade
right?
a little bit. They will fade a little bit. Yep. But at that age, he's still the nicest one that I saw at that age. I've got three visual AMLs that are all like really, really top quality, but he's just next level, man. His color is top.
Wow. For me, this is, the epitome of what the top of the line African fat tail is. Now, Nanette just said, I thought they were all brown. Some had stripes, some had. And
That's all I've ever
so
seen.
she's
back when y'all were keeping them, that's how it was. Yeah.
Right.
That's
It
all
changed
I've
a
ever
lot.
seen.
Right.
Well, they only just started importing the morphs like in the late 2000s, like 08, 09 is when they kind of first started pulling a bunch in from the wild. Is when they first. The interesting fact about fat tails is all the genetics we're working with, except for the whiteout, were all found in the wild. They were all imported. Oreos, AMLs, caramels, everything was imported except for whiteout. Whiteout ended up popping up in JMG collection.
Okay.
I thought you were mixing.
That's soot. That's the Oreo patty. That's Mango Project. Yeah, I think you went through them all.
Yep. I think so. I'm going to go back to
gorgeous.
Help me here, Seth. Which one was the? That's the whiteout, right?
Yep.
Okay. So we've talked about the normals. Some have stripes, some don't. Are stripes genetic? Does anybody know that? It is.
Stripe is dominant. It's definitely dominant. I think it's incomplete dominant because I've heard of people that have stripes that will only produce stripes. I don't have any in my collection, but that tells me that there's a super form. Visually, it doesn't look any different, but genetically, it acts different in that it only produces stripes when bred to anything else. So stripe is definitely dominant. I think it's incomplete dominant. That's my take on it. So yeah. That's the thing on stripes, and those exist very frequently in the wild. I actually have, I've bought striped wild caughts before, so
okay,
that's pretty readily available.
So that's kind of like, and I'm probably going to challenge you with your list here. So we've got the normals, stripe or not stripe, and then we have patternless. And I'm not trying to go up for ranks of best fat tails, but just
just going through them.
So we've got. What did I just say? Patternless. We have maybe caramel is not a good time to start talking about caramel, but we have caramel, which is a beautiful light brown, not a dark brown, a light brown.
It's almost a true pink, honestly. The caramels, anymore. I mean, maybe the caramels whenever you were first seeing them, but they're almost a true pink anymore.
Wow, really?
Yeah,
interesting.
I've got. I mean, if you want to get into showing some.
Yeah, if you don't mind, that'd be great.
So this boy here is let me turn my lights on. Hang on.
Okay. Oh, this is going to be fun, folks. Oh my gosh.
All right, so I hate showing geckos on the cameras because the angles always suck,
I
right?
know, and they don't behave, and
So this is a whiteout caramel Zulu.
oh my gosh.
So you got pink coloration.
Make that all one screen instead of two.
You know what?
The
Bear with me for a
Yeah,
second here. I'm going to try something here. I'm going to try to get rid of me. You know what? I'm just going to remove me.
Can we still hear you? No, that doesn't work, Wally.
I guess I'll come back. You do have to look at me. Sorry, folks. I was just trying to make this bigger.
No, that's good. Honestly, I mean, go
Maybe
to my
that's
web.
better?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Honestly, you know, these videos don't do justice. So
No, they don't.
Definitely go check them out.
No, what is this?
In the good pics. But that's a whiteout caramel Zulu.
Okay.
Whiteout caramel Zulu. We're going to talk about Zulus in just a second, too, folks.
That's 3 genes going on there. This is a Zulu by itself.
Okay, perfect.
I'm gonna just start going through them, Wally.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a Zulu by itself.
Mm-hmm.
What makes
So
this a Zulu?
So the Zulu is a recessive gene. It connects the bands to where you end up with this arrowhead pattern look.
Oh,
Yes.
And it also affects the color. It's also a color gene. So it makes a little bit more of a pastel-y palette.
Okay.
And you have that connection to the bands. Now, some Zulus aren't going to have a full connection. All of my Zulus, I started out with a perfect pattern Zulu, and it's very much of a line bred thing because some Zulus will be recessively technically a Zulu, but the pattern won't be completely connected like this. And it's just kind of a difference in the lineage, I think.
Is there something to do with the belly as well with Zulus?
Yes, correct. Yeah, the bellies are going to have translucent scales on them, which is kind of hard to see here. But with that said, I've seen a few translucent scales on other animals too that aren't Zulu, but not in as much quantity and consistency. So it's kind of like it's not a tell-all. And then this is the caramel without the Zulu. This is just the caramel all by itself, just the pink banding.
Oh my gosh.
Isn't that something?
See, these are definitely fat tails because they're not running like a leopard would be.
Exactly. Yeah.
So now I believe it.
You're right.
I'm just kidding.
You're right. And this guy's actually a
animal?
little bit wild sometimes, but this is a caramel here.
Oh,
Beautiful.
So I'll see a nice Zulu and I'll say that's the best looking one. Then I'll see a nice caramel and I'll say, oh, that's nice. That's the nicest African. Then I'll see the whiteouts and I'll go, no, that's the nicest.
You do realize
All right,
we have no room in this facility for
we
these
have
animals.
plenty of room.
We
I'll
have
make
no room.
Here's a wild caught. This boy's wild caught. So this is
Ye of little faith.
We have no room.
That's a challenge.
More so what they look like in the wild. He's a really pretty wild caught, but
beautiful. I like the white on this one. Very clean and pure.
Yeah. So that's just the brown on brown kind of coffee color that they look in the wild. And that'll be with or without the stripe and a lot of consistency. And then these are some tangerines, which is a line bred morph. It's not really a morph, actually. It's just a line. This boy here is a tangerine. So you can see a lot more orange coloration in him.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
And this girl here's a tangerine as well.
Oh, look at that.
She's probably the nicest tangerine I've ever hatched.
Oh.
And she'll be going to that boy that I just showed, and they are barely related. They have they have the same grandma, and that's it. So I'm big on keeping that genetic diversity going because it's something that I've seen a little bit of issue with some projects in general. And so it's something that I think is really important with these guys because it's something that I think nobody's focused enough attention on, or not enough people are focused enough attention on at this point.
Seth, fix your camera.
Unless you're showing more geckos.
Yeah, unless you're showing another gecko.
Yep.
Oh,
he just
went
He'll
out.
be back in a second, folks. Don't panic. This is something I would do. I'm amazed that I haven't turned the stream off by now. So Seth will come back online in just a second. That's cool. So, I've been going down the list here. So we have normals, and then we have the patternless, and we have the caramel. Do you say caramel or do you say caramel? Caramel. I'm from the south. I'm from the south.
Caramel.
I'm from the south. I don't say crappies.
No
I say crappies.
in the middle. It's spelled caramel.
That's what I say.
You can't spell anything.
I can't spell anything. So Seth is coming.
Sorry, Seth.
I'm back.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
That's her fault.
Well, I have more geckos. I have more geckos coming. I understand. So this is my new favorite morph to work with. This is Ghost. Remember I told you Ghost and AML is going to be a purple and orange gecko? Well, this is Ghost all by itself, okay?
So if I may, and no disrespect whatsoever, but this is because I don't know anything about the genetics or anything, but this is probably my least favorite.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting.
You know why?
Like the white.
Because oh my gosh, the orange is. I'm an orange person, so orange.
Well, wait till I get orange here on the background with purple on the banding, Wally. It's going to be insane.
Mopet's tangerine is right up there too. This Ghost reminds me of Blizzard leopard geckos, where you've taken the color out of the leopard gecko, and I want to see more color.
It is kind of a hypo. It is a hypo, but it's a recessive. So that's a simple recessive.
Is Ghost a means to an end? Is Ghost something that I'm working toward this?
Well, so Ghost it's a simple recessive, but a key note to mention is Ghost and Caramel, both the females of those two morphs are infertile.
Okay.
So that's a workaround that you have to use, or you have to work around. That's a factor you have to work around with these guys with those two morphs, is that you have to use het females because the visual females of those two morphs are infertile.
Visual.
Yep.
Okay.
The visuals.
Okay.
The visual males are fine, but the visual females are infertile. So don't even try, because like with the Ghost, it can actually be detrimental to their health.
Yeah.
And with the caramels, they'll just produce duds.
So I haven't heard that before. I have heard, and I don't understand a whole lot about the genetics. I haven't been in the African fat tail area for a while, but tell us about whiteouts. Help me understand about whiteouts.
So you want to see them first and then talk about them?
Yeah.
Well, hang on. Let me just go through.
I had a whiteout.
Let me go through some of the other stuff first before we get to that. So here's that ammo boy you showed earlier.
Yeah.
This is him in person.
Oh,
that's the same boy.
There you go.
Just so orange and so white.
As an adult, that has a lot of orange.
Yeah, he's still got a little growing to do, but yeah, he's over a year old now. He's fully developed for sure. These are whiteouts. So here's let me show you the patty first. Okay, so this is just a plain patternless, just more of the brown, just plain kind of chocolate brown, poop brown, pretty unimpressive, right?
Yeah.
Now the patternless comes in a lot of varieties though. This is also just a patternless, but a much prettier coloration. She's from one of my projects, the AML Ghost project. I'm not working with this camera well. So she's a much different coloration.
Yeah.
And then you've got the whiteout patternless with the stripe. How cool is that? This one's got a lot of orange. There you go, Wally.
I've just
found a lot of contrast, a lot of orange.
You just hit the mark. There you go. Show's over, folks. You can go home now. Thanks, everyone. We just found the best one.
That's the whiteout. That's the whiteout patternless with the stripe. Now this is a whiteout patternless without the stripe. We showed her earlier too. We showed a picture of her.
Love it. Absolutely love it.
Whiteout patternless without the stripe.
Oh my gosh.
And then this is an AML patternless.
Oh my gosh.
Just straight.
Nanette just said he's showing leopard geckos again.
Just straight up orange.
Look at that.
And she just shed yesterday. I know she was in blue yesterday when I cleaned her tub. So
beautiful animal.
Thank you. She's really special too. She's the sister of that whiteout patternless from that AML Ghost project. So she's an AML patty, and she's 66% het ghost. Now here's an example of the fading. So you saw how bright she was.
Yeah.
This is a 2-year-old AML patty.
Okay.
From different lineage, but
Very
and
interesting.
I don't think this one was quite as bright as that last one I showed whenever she was that age.
Mhm.
Oh.
But she was nearly as bright. So that's an AML patty adult.
Again, we have no space.
That's a challenge. Whenever you say that, that's a dare.
And then these are whiteout AML combos. So the AML and the whiteout goes really well together.
Mhm.
You get that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So the whiteout breaks up the pattern. You asked me about the whiteout to explain it a little bit. The morph itself, what it does is it reduces the banding and breaks up the pattern. This is a pretty basic whiteout. She's actually a het-free whiteout. So this is a pretty basic, like run-of-the-mill whiteout that you would see, on the lower end of the spectrum.
But a beautiful animal.
Still beautiful animal, absolutely. But then I mentioned earlier the variety of the whiteout gene. So these that I'm going to show you are all still just whiteouts. They don't have any other genetics at play. Okay. But look at the visual difference. This is what I call more of the high white or high contrast whiteout. And this is from my mango project.
Is the tail, would it be possible to take the top off for a second, Seth? Do you mind?
No, absolutely.
Is the tail purple? Blue?
It's blue. Yeah, true blue all the way. And there's a cool story behind that, Wally. You know Craig Cagney? Reptiles Pest Direct?
Oh, yeah.
He's been in it for a long, long time.
Yep.
He and I were standing outside of NRBC one day at Arlington after the show and hanging out and talking, and we were talking about fat tails. And he was like, man, I've got a picture of one of the first patternless fat tails that was ever found. My importer sent it to me years ago. And he pulled it up and he showed me. And I looked at it and I didn't even look at the gecko, dude. There was a little stone right next to the gecko. It was a picture of this fat tail in the wild. Okay. And there was a little bitty stone right next to the gecko. And it was that same color blue that you see on these tails. It was a tiny little pebble and it was that identical color. But yeah.
Oh my gosh.
How amazing is the colors and everything on that freaking gecko? That's Mango Project right there, buddy.
So I look at this and I say, this is art. This is putting all the right colors on your palette and painting a picture, and this is art.
Thank you. Also Mango Project.
Jeez. Do you get a lot of questions on your table as far as when you're showing these animals? What's the deal with the tail?
Yes, yeah. A lot of people are curious about the tail. This is that same really nice girl, that favorite one we showed earlier on the pictures. This is her in person.
Look at that tail.
And these guys do fire up and down just a little bit, Wally.
Do they?
Mostly with stress and heat. So these guys, like right now that I'm showing, they're not necessarily at their tip top because they've been sitting for a couple hours.
They're right there.
But they're not as bad as they are like at the show when they're really stressed out. They kind of look like junk. It's frustrating.
Yeah.
This is another whiteout. This is another version of the whiteout. This guy's also from Nick at Leopard Gecko. But look at the cool background on this guy. He doesn't have the white background. He's got just like his name is Rusty actually, because he's got that rust coloration all through his background coloration.
It's got to be fun. Excuse me, because you're looking for certain things when you're breeding these animals, and Nick is looking for certain things with his, and just on down the line, and JMG, all the way down the line, people are looking because they like certain. This is beautiful. I love the cream. It's got
this girl. Cool. This girl is 50% wild caught. Her mom is wild caught.
Wait, say that again.
She's 50% wild caught lineage. So her mom. Well, no, her mom's not wild caught. Her mom is an F1 that I produced from wild caught animals.
Okay.
So there's actually a cool story behind her and that really tangerine one I showed earlier. These two are sisters. These two are sisters. So I sold a whiteout Oreo and an F1 to somebody at an expo. And then a few years later, they decided they were getting out and they were selling some babies really, really, really young, and just trying to, dump. And so I bought all the babies she had. I made her a pretty low ball offer for all the babies because they were pretty young, and I could tell she was just trying to get rid of them. And so I bought all the babies from her. I think it was 4 babies. It was, I think, 3 normals and 1 whiteout. And I decided to keep these 2, and they turned out amazing. But so these guys are very, very cool looking, and they are only slightly related to my mango project, and they have wild-caught lineage in them. So they're going to be awesome injections into that project because they're not going to take away from the visual aspect at all. But they're going to bring in so much. I know you keep hearing me talk about genetic diversity, but it's a big, 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 player in my book.
Yep.
But they're going to bring in so much genetic diversity to the project that it's going to be unreal. So I got one more stack of genetics to go through to show you, Wally, and then we're done with genetics.
Annette just mentioned he doesn't live anywhere close to us, does he? And yeah, he's an airport away.
No, we don't allow shipments to our house anymore. Remember, they're all.
So this is
that rule.
This is that Oreo boy we showed earlier, and he is a big boy.
He is a big boy.
That's Thor, and he's still got growing to do. And his son's even bigger. You're about to see. This is Godzilla. So Godzilla is barely a year old. Okay, these guys grow for 2 years. Look at
Holy cow!
So he's from my size. He's from my size project. It's called the Colossal Project. His granddad is Colossus. That's Thor's dad is Colossus. So I bred Colossus to my biggest patternless female that was unrelated, and then I bred 2 of their daughters back to him. And then so I'm getting these really big size geckos from that project, and the Black Velvet project popped out of that project. So
oh my gosh, how cool.
Not only are they going to be super, super dark black geckos, but this is a good example of comparison. Watch. Remember I told you how the Black Velvet, how significant it was?
Yeah.
The coloration. So this is a half brother, or from a similar project. This is from the size project, and this is soot.
Wow.
So how many grams, both of those? Just a rough guesstimate.
He's probably about 70 grams already, and she's probably about 50, roughly.
Jeez. And 50, that's a nice, healthy, normal fat tail.
Yeah, yeah. I don't keep my animals overweight at all. You can see my female tails are not, obese by any means. I keep them pretty lean, just kind of a fit. But that's 2 different versions of Oreo patty. You've got the typical version that you see most of the time, save the size. Yeah. And then the dark version that I've only seen one other person. There's a girl in I think she's in Vietnam, Wally, that has some really dark Oreo patties that she's hatching, and she's the only other person I've seen with them. So I told her we should collaborate one day, but she said she's going to be waiting for a while, so we'll see. I'm in the same boat though. I'm not in a hurry. We're going to just see what happens with them.
Have you thought about? I know that Trumper, Ron Trumper with Leopard geckos, and you know the story with moose and holding back breeding moose for a long, long time to get it to be bigger. Are you thinking about doing that with some of your animals to get the maximum?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not power feeding anything. I'm not like trying to. I've noticed some of those like super giants that you see a lot of people advertise are really just fat geckos that people just overfed. Again, I keep all my animals pretty lean. The larger males do get a little bit more food and a little bit more often, but not by any extreme amount. But yeah, I'm definitely trying to. That's one of my projects, is trying to line breed towards a bigger, consistent size. I don't think I'll ever call it, like a genetically like recessive giant or anything or anything like that. It's line breeding. It's just you breed bigger animals to bigger animals, and you get bigger animals is kind of my take on it. So I'm just trying to focus on that, on just that project. I like robust animals in all of my projects. Like I mentioned, those 30, 35 gram females and even those 35, 40 gram males usually don't cut the mustard around here. I like the robustness in my projects generally, but that project specifically is targeted at size. We live in San Antonio, Mopets, San Antonio, Texas.
Oh, good. He's far away.
This is one of my favorite whiteout Oreos in my collection. She is just so much coverage on that Oreo and so dark. Some Oreos have a lot of like chocolatey coloration to their
Yes.
black, and she is just true black.
Tell us about whiteouts. So
Yes.
So
About the controversial part of whiteouts?
Tell me about the controversial part, and I'll tell you a little bit of a backstory to this. I started thinking I need to have other animals, and I told you a little bit about this. I need to have other animals on our table. Cool to have leopard geckos and crested geckos, and I have the rare geckos, but I don't have anything as a stepping stone. I thought fat tails. I love fat tails. I haven't done fat tails in a long time. Time to get back into fat tails. And then I started seeing, the Oreos, and I knew there was something. And it's like, I don't want to buy anything because I don't know what the heck is going on with the. I said Oreos. I meant whiteouts. Yeah. What's the deal with whiteouts?
So, some lines of whiteouts can have issues.
Okay.
It's similar to the
white
issues that they. Yeah, it's similar to white and yellow. That'd be a really good comparison, because white and yellow, there are some lines out there that are really tainted that a lot of the animals present issues, and there's some lines out there that you never see issues, and there's some lines out there that you only rarely see an issue here and there. And when I say an issue, I mean some kind of neurological issue.
Yes.
What we see with the whiteout neurological issues, or what I've seen in the past, is a little bit of a head tilt on some of them, a little bit of, or sometimes a very significant missed aim. So like you'll hold a roach right in front of them and they'll strike like 90 degrees to the right, to where you literally have to just like shove food into their mouth and they can't even sustain themselves properly, right? So that's something I dealt with a certain line. My original line of animals that I bought, that first trio I mentioned, they had an issue, and it was genetically passing on to the offspring and to the great, the second generation offspring. And so that was one project that I kind of just snubbed and moved on from. And there, obviously, as you can see, I have a lot of whiteouts in my collection. And at this point, I'm seeing, and this is full transparency, guys, I don't hide anything. I see maybe a 0.5% of the whiteouts that I produce that have any issue at all. And I'm talking like, and that could be even, I see a few normals here and there that have issues, that are just random issues. But and this isn't like I've worked to this point. I think I've just gotten lucky with a couple of animals that have ended up being, producing me pretty healthy animals. But I've got a lot of whiteouts in my collection. Excuse me, I got it.
Sure.
Gecko messed in his cup and he's about to start climbing in it.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of whiteouts in my collection, and I produce a lot of whiteouts. Almost every one of my pairings has a whiteout in the pairing. But most of them trace back to only a few animal in lineage.
Okay.
So I think, like I said, I've just gotten lucky in that case of those few animals being, worthy and not passing on a lot of it. Well, with the exception of that group that I nixed. That I kind of just sold everybody off as pets. I've still got a couple of, like my very first fat tail I ever produced was from that project, and so I still have her. There's some that are hanging around just as pets, but
this is extremely informative, because what I'm hearing you say is that and I know that you've been working with these animals for a long time. It's not a case of, oh my gosh, if you're working with whiteouts, you're going to get this. And if you do this with a whiteout and this with a whiteout, you are going to have issues. It's more that you're going to say that it's more luck than work, but I'm going to say just the opposite. Through your lines, you're seeing very little of evidence of this issue with whiteouts, which means that, in my mind, as a buyer, that if I buy from you, and I know you're a guest on the show, but I'm trying to be informative to everybody else listening. If you buy from a good breeder, you're going to be less likely to have issues.
And good breeders are going to stand behind their animals too.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
Like it just goes without saying. Like if you buy an animal from me and it ends up with issues that were totally unforeseen and totally obviously not caused by poor husbandry or whatever, then I'm going to stand behind that animal and we're going to make it right. But yeah, it just kind of goes back to doing your homework and working with ethical keepers and ethical breeders. Not everybody has the attention to detail that others do. So
Yes,
that's a big factor. Because if you're just mass producing them and pumping them out and selling them, you're not even going to notice some of these issues. Like because some of the issues that I've noticed like don't even come up until they're like older, a couple years old, and exposed to like the stress of breeding or something like that, or the stress of a photo shoot or something totally mundane to all the other collection, but to that one gecko, it ended up being a really big deal. So yeah, that's the thing with whiteouts. I am still eyes wide open with the morph. I am not by any means decided that I've got it figured out and that I'm like, the man with the only healthy line, out there or anything like that. I'm eyes wide open with it. But again, I produce a lot of them and I'm seeing a very, very, very small fraction of animals. And like one of the ones I saw this year, again, full transparency. Everybody makes mistakes. I brought the way I process my animals, my babies. When they hatch, they go home, and I mentioned the boys take care of them. So I bring hatchlings home in the hatchling cups. I put the cups in a little insulated, soft-sided ice chest, and they come home with me. It was a fairly cool day. I had a single baby hatch that day, and I have cryo packs that I run in there. And that day, because it was so cold outside, I warmed up the cryo packs, and I normally triple check the temps with a temp gun. And that day I didn't. And I put them in there and I got home and I pulled this baby out and it was turning circles. And I think that might have been user error there. You know what I mean? But I don't know. So like, that's one of the two that I'm thinking of from that project that I saw issues with. So who knows,
Who knows? Absolutely. We talked a little bit about your mango project, which sounds like to me that's really high on your list. Everybody has, if you're working with leopard geckos or crested geckos or the African fantails, you have that, pie in the sky kind of, this kind of, and maybe you have 2 or 3 different projects that you're aiming at. Is the mango the big one for you? Are you working with that? We talked a little bit about the overseas white African fantail. Are those your top of the top kind of projects right now?
So I'm not really shooting for the solid white, because that's that's something that I just haven't shot for. The solid black one is something that just popped up randomly for me a few years ago, and so I'm really hoping that comes to some fruition, but it's not dialed in yet. The mango project is definitely my most refined project that I've been working on for a while, and that was also by total chance. Like Mango herself hatched by total accident. She was the product of a gecko that I received that was gravid, that laid eggs, and I produced this really cool looking gecko that doesn't look a whole lot different than this animal here.
Oh,
okay. She's not quite as cool looking as this, but she's got a little bit of a tangy background to her, and I didn't have the male that I needed for her that year whenever she was ready. And so I put her to a tangerine amel male to try to make some whiteout amel, or some whiteout het amel babies.
Yeah.
To try to work towards a whiteout amel. That was my original goal with that project. And all of the babies that hatched that year from that pairing were all just drop dead gorgeous. And I kept them all. And then the next year, even though I had the male that was supposed to go with that to Mango, instead of putting her to the male that was supposed to go with her, I put her to, well, actually, you remember I told you I had a male that one year went to one girl and the next year went to 2 girls. It was that male. I had him already. He had just already gone to another girl. And then when Mango came around to ovulate, he wasn't interested. So that's why she went to the tangerine. So it's all by chance, right?
Yeah.
She ended up going to the tangerine amel instead and produced the first generation of Mango project stuff that was all really beautiful and just unique looking, and I kept. And then so the next year, instead of putting her to Quicksilver that she was supposed to go to a little Oreo het patty, she went to a better Tang male and produced Skittles, the one that I lost last year, and produced some other stuff. Like the mom to that best one that I showed you earlier from this year, that's Skittles' sister. You know, so like this is the stuff that's coming out of that project now that all came by total chance of just, well, I don't have the right male, or this male isn't interested, so let me just put her to this instead. So, you know, that's where my statement of like I've gotten really fortunate with some pairings in some cases, you know.
Hey,
Yes,
folks, I want to say this is not leopard geckos. This is not take this and this, and you're going to get a 6% chance. And if you do this and this, then next year you're going to get this, and then the year after you're going to get this. It feels like, and correct me if I'm wrong, Seth, it feels like this is kind of flipping the coin still. We kind of know,
yeah,
but
no, it's tricky.
don't know
It's
how
tricky.
much.
It's tricky. No, that's I see all the
And
time,
that's
Wally.
fun.
I see people get into them. They'll be leopard gecko breeders, and they'll be like, "Oh, I want to get in fat tails," and they'll get a bunch of fat tails, and they'll work with them for about 2 years, and then they'll get out because they realize in those 2 years that it's just a little bit more than they bargained for,
Okay.
or a little bit more challenge than they're willing to mess with, or a little bit more, you know, messed up babies that hatch that they're willing to, you know, to deal with, because it's not as plug and play. Like I have a good buddy of mine, Eclectic Reptile, David Eldine. He's got an amazing collection. He's got some really cool stuff, but he does the Blue Beauty and Knowles. And talking to him about those, he's like, man, these things are so prolific. They're so fun to work with. And I'm talking to him about like, man, how many messed up, you know, do you get like messed up babies or bad nutrition or anything? He's like, no, 100% hatch rate, 100% success rate. Just like, and I'm like, oh, I would die for something like that, you know? But then at the other end of the spectrum, like I say all the time, that's part of what I like about the fat tails is that they are so much more challenging, and that there's less people working with them for that reason. There's less people that stick with them and really go long term with them for that reason.
It's
so
not
it
cookie
kind of
cutter by any means.
exactly.
Hey, I've had you here for how many hours? 6 hours? No, it's 2.5 hours. It feels like 10 minutes. Seriously, this is so valuable. I'm going to hit some really quick questions, and then we're going to let you go here. Oh, geez, I just lost that one. Crud. I know this is a controversial question among keepers, but do you cohabitate? I think we kind of talked a little bit about that. Yeah,
I keep everybody individual. I pair just to pair for about a week or so.
Didn't you
sometimes even only a few days.
Didn't you have a video on your YouTube channel? Somebody sponsored an enclosure, and you put 5 of them together.
Yeah. No, I don't recommend doing it. I tried it with a clutch of females that I bought that were kept together from babies, and it didn't go well with them. They were beating up on each other and bruising each other. It's just not worth it.
How often,
do they shed? Same about like leopard gecko or most other geckos. During their growth rate in babies, or their growth phase in babies, pretty often, every couple of weeks, and adults maybe once a month or so.
Okay. And our last question of the night: do African fat tails get eye caps like leopard geckos do? Go ahead, Nanette. If you see,
I have not seen much issue with that with my Leos or fat tails. Honestly, I imagine they can, because their anatomy is almost identical. So yes would be the answer. As far as is it as common, I've not seen it common at all in my leopard geckos, so I can't attest to it being common in fat tails as opposed to now. As you see a lot of leopard geckos out there with eye caps, right?
Yeah.
Well, you have to also keep in mind the amount of leopard geckos that are sold every year to people that don't know what they're doing, that have horrible husbandry, that are going to have an exacerbated amount of eye caps as a result, right? As opposed to the smaller number of fat tails. It's a numbers game, right? So as far as like what you see on social media, you see a lot of leopard geckos that are horrible condition with eye caps that people apparently tried to kill, because you have to try to kill a leopard gecko to actually kill it, right? So that's my kind of run of the mill answer there, is that's a numbers game, I think.
I cannot tell you how many times I've been messaged about a ill leopard gecko something's wrong with the leopard gecko, and I'll ask the number one question: what's your temperatures? What do you mean temperatures? I never checked. Well, should be this. What are you using for heat? What do you mean using
What heat?
for heat?
Yeah. What are you talking about? I had some customers walk up to me with a critter keeper the other day, and they were ready to buy a gecko, and I was like, "What's that for?" And they're like, "For her." I'm like, "You need a heat source," and they're like, "Yeah, we got a heat lamp too. See?" And I was like, "No, that's not gonna work."
We
Like,
educated.
you're not getting a gecko. I didn't tell him exactly this, but I was like, "You're not getting a gecko from us." Like, I was like, I brought him back over to the dry goods vendor, and I made him. I convinced him to let them, because I know them. They let them return everything, and I was like, "Y'all aren't ready yet. Y'all need to do some research. Y'all need to definitely do some homework." Because it was one of those deals. They got there at like Sunday right before it closed, and they felt like they were in a rush, right, in a hurry. I was like, "Look, I'm local. Y'all learn your stuff and get back to me, and I'll get you fixed up. But you're not ready right now." So, yeah.
And some people will acknowledge that. Some people will just look at you and then just walk away.
I was really surprised that they took it really well. They were like, "No, thank
Good.
you," and they walked away with, right intentions.
Outstanding. I had a few questions here, but I mean, oh my gosh, we covered so much information tonight. But we do have one point that I wanted to make here. Cassandra, not me. I think we're done for like ever. I don't ever want to have you here on the live again. But Cassandra, we've got to satisfy our customers. Great live tonight. Definitely would like to see you again, Seth, to see what's new and change with your breeding programs with AFTs. And I hope everybody knows that I joke around a lot. And this has been one of my favorite. Do I say this with every? Don't tell Seth that.
Probably so. You say that to all the girls, don't you, Wally?
I say that to all the girls. Seriously, though, this has probably been the most informative, little nugget-filled interviews I've ever experienced. I watch a flippin' lot of YouTube videos. So this has been outstanding and so appreciative. And the work that you did cupping all those geckos and the time that you've given to us tonight, I cannot thank you more. But absolutely, per Cassandra, we would love to have you on again, maybe next year about the same time, and get an update and see the amazing mango projects and maybe even the snow project that you're working on, and see how everything's going with Huff's Herps.
For sure. Thanks for having me, Wally. I enjoyed it. It was a great conversation.
It was my pleasure entirely. Nanette, anything?
No, I learned a lot, and I know you're not getting any. You have no room.
Hit me up, Wally. We'll get you fixed up, dude.
Hey.
You got my number, right?
So much for seeing you again.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you,
Good
Wally.
night, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks again.
Later, guys.